Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Clément.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Grouville.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Ouen.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Southern.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Laddie.
Présente.
Monsieur le Deputy Tadier. Monsieur le Deputy Luce.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Doublé.
Présente.
Monsieur le Deputy Morel.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Lehegara. Monsieur le Deputy Ayer.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Ward.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Alves.
Présente.
Madame le Deputy Gardner.
Présente.
Monsieur le Deputy Gorst. Monsieur le Deputy Farnham. Madame le Deputy Moore. Monsieur le Deputy Mezek.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Joseph.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Balash.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Coles.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Poré. Monsieur le Deputy War.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Miles.
Présente.
Madame le Deputy Scott.
Présente.
Monsieur le Deputy Renner.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Curtis. Madame le Deputy Feltham.
Présente.
Madame le Deputy Binet.
Présente.
Madame le Deputy Jeune.
Présente.
Madame le Deputy Miller.
Présente.
Madame le Deputy Howe.
Présente.
Monsieur le Deputy Binet. Monsieur le Deputy Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Kovac.
Présente.
Monsieur le Deputy Curtis.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Ward.
Présente.
Madame le Deputy Wilson.
Présente.
Madame le Deputy Stevenson. Monsieur le Deputy Andrews.
Monsieur le doyen.
Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait le ciel et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et les puissances de la terre pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, et de la conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit que toute leur délibération est accompagnée de ta bénédiction. Réussisse au bien-être et au soulagement du peuple, qu'il te plut de commettre à leurs soins. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par les mérites de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonnons nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous envoie point en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car à toi est le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Laurent est malade.
Vous jurez que Madame la Connétable de Saint-Laurent est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister aux États sans exposer sa santé. Madame la Connétable de Saint-Martin.
Madame le Connétable de Saint-Martin est aussi malade.
Vous jurez que Madame la Connétable de Saint-Martin est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister aux États sans exposer sa santé. Monsieur le Deputy Tadier.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Lehegara.
Défaut.
Sorry, sir.
Madam Deputy Lehegara is attending a family matter. Her daughter is in hospital in Glasgow. I believe she's marked excuse. I asked that she be after the same. Thank you.
Yes. Excusez.
Monsieur le Deputy Gorst.
Sorry, Deputy Gorse is still out of the island on States business at the World Bank IMF meetings.
State's business.
Monsieur le Deputy Farnham.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Moore.
Défaut.
Madame le Deputy Poré.
So Deputy Corey is still on States business with the CPA, a legislative conference, I wish I could say that word, conference in the UK. So I was on States business, thanks.
States business, yes.
Monsieur le Député Binet.
Défaut.
Madame la Deputy Stevenson.
Deputy Stevenson is absent for parental duties. Les États sont constitués. Very well. We continue now with the debate on P.45. Does anyone wish to speak on the matter? Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir, or should I say, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais commencer mon discours en félicitant chaleureusement Monsieur le député Balash d'avoir présenté et proposé cette proposition devant cette Assemblée. So I'm well aware, as Nelson Mandela said, that if you talk to a person in the language they understand, that it goes to their heads. If you talk to them in their language, it goes to their hearts. So I'm going to continue, if I may, in the English language, as I know that is the language that is in majority cases, the language that may well, by some remarks in this important debate, go to members' hearts.
Deputy, would you mind if I interrupted you for just a moment to reflect the fact we are joined in the public gallery by honoured guests, specifically His Excellency, the Ambassador to the Court of St James from Italy, and his party, who are joining us today. Monsieur le Député, please continue.
I'm afraid I cannot. It would not be lawful for me to speak in Italian, sir. I am capable of speaking a number of languages, but having such international guests in the gallery, I think underlines the importance of this debate and the importance, if I may take the opportunity of welcoming those guests, that we welcome, of course, guests from many countries and many European countries. Most members know that I am a linguist, and I think my life has changed and was changed immeasurably by the knowledge of another language. I absolutely support a very long-standing objective of Deputy Balash's, and one which I have also been involved in the past. He spoke in his opening remarks about the osmosis effect that early language learning has. And I can say that that is absolutely correct. And I think that any member of this Assembly who had the experience of hearing more than just one language in their very early years was changed as a result of it. Immersing young children in another language at a young age is literally a life-changing gift. It opens doors to new opportunities. It opens the ability for perspectives that change one's knowledge, one's interpretation of other people. It builds and fosters respect and understanding in a way that is almost incalculable. Early language acquisition is like literally the opening of a window onto another world. It is the thing, as Deputy Balash says, that enhances creativity. It builds empathy, understanding, and it also helps in this fast-moving, technological-driven world. It is a skill that embraces and enhances an individual's ability to critically think and think fast. I benefited from that. And I have in my friendship group almost exclusively individuals who are bilingual by virtue of the fact that I was able to go to a university that was bilingual. I went to a European business school, a business school that was created initially in Germany, and at those very early doors in the late 1980s when there was the aspiration of a European single market, the ability to converse in different languages was seen as being a vital ability for future business leaders, which it was a business school. I studied economics, and it was interesting that we had the same curriculum taught to us in the different year groups in different languages. It was the same curriculum in a different language. And so I find it quite difficult when I hear the kind of scepticism that Deputy Ward exemplified when he said it was so difficult. It really isn't difficult, and I'm an example of that. I didn't get just one degree, I got more than one because I studied in those 3 different countries, in France, in Germany, and in the United Kingdom. All of my friends who are bilingual, who I've asked, wouldn't change that experience for anything. And that's also proven by the fact that they're doing it with their children. Where there is even a couple who is French, they try and ensure that their children from a very early age have the ability to learn and hear another language. I know that my mother, who was, I think, the only Jersey girl who, we've got the letters to prove it, battled with the education department in the 1950s because the education department of the day refused to give her a grant to go to a French university. Well, I can say that I've read a lot of the letters and they are amazing. And she got what she wanted. And a woman going to university in France, in Paris, was something that was almost unheard of. Maybe she was as resilient as that resilience has been passed on with me. I think that the opportunity to give children the ability to speak one, and then of course the second language does one thing. It means, and the statistics are very clear, it means that the ability to learn a third and a fourth language is commensurately by a percentage, I think, of 30% made easier. So the acquisition of a first and second language early accelerates and means that you can learn more languages, understand more cultures, and build those empathies and those understandings in a faster way than you otherwise would do. As a former Treasury Minister, sir, it was once said that I knew the cost of everything but the value of nothing. I surprised members in the Council of Ministers by actually breaking ranks. I broke collective responsibility. I think I did it twice. But the 2 reasons were that I broke ranks because the Education Department wanted to cut language assistance. I was completely against it. I couldn't bring myself to vote for it. And so I broke ranks and I went to this assembly and I got those language assistants with those other members who agreed with me. And I'm looking across at Deputy Taddia, who's smiling knowingly, because it is not a case that this is I hope, a whipped vote, and a vote that will be even a vote that the Reform Party or the Council of Ministers will unilaterally vote and together vote. This is a free vote, I hope. This is an important vote. It's a cultural vote. It goes straight to the heart of who we are, who we were, who we are, and who we can be. In terms of those numbers, however, and those values, let me say that there is evidence, very clear evidence, that the ability to speak an additional language, and particularly French, it does improve the earning capability of individuals. I'm not going to bore members with the statistics, but in sectors like finance, which is of course so important in our island, in healthcare and communications, bilingual workers earn thousands of pounds more annually than their monolingual peers. That is what investment in education is really about. And giving our young people that ability is going to increase their earning potential and their earning ability. I don't need to tell members that Jersey is a unique place. It's unique because we are at a crossroads where French and English language and cultures have met. They're indelible. They're part of our past, and I believe that they can be important in our future. Our economy depends on trade. It involves having to send something or bills to somebody else in another place in the world. And in this increasing globalized world, it is vital that we give the skills to young people of that ability to trade. There was a report by a very well-respected institute called RAND that said that increasing the number of UK secondary schools pupils' language learning could boost by 10% the UK GDP. They cited a figure of 12 billion over 20 years. Bilingualism plays a crucial role also in removing trade barriers. That's why I went to the European Business School. It was thought that basically forming young people with the ability to converse in 3 or 4, in our case, languages would basically ensure that the trade barriers between European nations, whether Italy and Germany, would be reduced. And I recall a very good example of that when former Senator Pierre Horsfall was engaged in some very difficult discussions with Breton and Norman counterparts. And the former Senator Horsfall was brought up with a knowledge of Breton. There's 2 languages actually in Britain. There's l'Argot and there's also the Gaelic version of Breton. And in the start of the discussions, it's recounted in his book, he actually says that he said a few words to one of his opposite numbers in Breton, and it completely changed the mood of the meeting. So we have massive examples of our bilingual French heritage. Victor Hugo. In my parish, we have Les Rochers des Écrivains, the Rock of the Writers. And if I could persuade Deputy Tadia to basically put some of that cultural money into celebrating that, Guernsey seems to be getting an awful lot of the French visitors. And I think we've got a story to tell about Victor Hugo. The Education Department are themselves in a former Catholic, French Catholic education institute, a naval college. And so that great hall in Highlands also has, it's not very well known this, but one of the most famous and most valuable organs built by Cavalier Coll. How about getting some organ recitals in that place? Apparently it's worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. We debated the importance of the maritime economy and net zero. Well, it's our French counterparts that are going to deliver the net zero hydrocarbon hydrogen solutions for our fishers. We need fishermen, we need young people, we need experts and civil servants that can speak French. A lot of French people speak English, of course, but of course it's always going to make those discussions with those French counterparts so much easier if you actually can even engage in some basic advanced conversations. I know it made a huge difference to me in the discussions we had in resolving what were a fractious relationship with France that we inherited, that we have solved and I know are continuing. Frank Smith, the psycholinguist, said, 1 language sets you in a corridor for life. 2 languages opens every door along the way. I want to ensure that the next generation is allowed to explore the world from multiple perspectives. And as an island that once advertised itself as an island, a tourist economy that was Britain closer to France, we are incredibly well placed to secure greater trade, to enjoy greater communication, to improve our lifestyles by better communications, physical with France. And isn't it going to be so much better to give our young people that ability to basically speak French from a very early age, to get that accent that will, in those very few first moments of that conversation, actually get the impression to that person that they may actually be almost French. Because in the first few words, if you have the ability, without an English accent, to speak French, you completely change the tone of the dialogue you have with your interlocutor partner. So this assembly has got the leadership position on behalf of islands. And I hope that this assembly will show some courage and some leadership, that they will put some real value on the importance of French in our past and in our future. We have become an anglicised island. Deputy Balash has sometimes pulled my leg, as I am sometimes more English than I am Jersey. And I know that he will be smiling and he will wrap up and say something about that. But I am a Jerseyman. I am very comfortable as a British Jerseyman, but I owe an enormous amount and place an enormous amount of importance on the fact that I am also of French heritage, with being the 5th generation of a Jersey family from France that still can find relations in France. And that's why I feel so much at home in Normandy and in Brittany, from where my ancestors came, and where there are Osephs, and there are many other members of this assembly whose origins will go there. And I believe that we can do so much more, and we need to improve those education standards, and setting in stone a bilingual school will do immeasurable benefit to our community of the future. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to? Constable St John.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I understand there was some feedback from some members on the quality of current French teaching in the debate yesterday. Well, sir, having listened to a number of primary schools in this assembly, I can only say that I've been thoroughly impressed with the quality of the French spoken on each occasion when pupils say the prayers. And for that, I congratulate the individuals, but also thank the teachers. So at my weekly surgery, I see on average 4 or 5 people each week. I've had just one person who came to see me to discuss this subject. Knowing the parishioner, a former teacher, I was surprised by her views. The lady wanted me to assure her that I wouldn't support this proposal. She actually had experience of working in a bilingual school, having worked in one in Canada, so she spoke from a position of experience. The reason for not wanting to see this proposal approved was from that experience, and she said there are many things to think about. She was concerned about both the practical implementation as well as the potential consequences of displacing local families from their catchment area. She was also very concerned about what selection criteria would be used. Could we do more to encourage our community to embrace French culture and the French language? Clearly, the answer is yes. Our own parish twinning came as a result of the relationship between our parish school and a French school. Sadly, the close working relationship between the two schools ceased many years ago, and we're going to celebrate 40 years of twinning next year. So I would like to resurrect that relationship between the two schools, utilising technology rather than the original concept of pen pals. This would be something practical to encourage our youngsters to learn more about our near neighbours and hopefully, as before, make lifelong friends. Finally, I've asked 2 head teachers for their views. The first, the head of a parish school, told me that they fully endorse the comments of the heads that have been circulated. Secondly, I asked a former head teacher I know to be fluent in more than one language for their view. The brief response was, you must reject. They pointed out that the majority of students do French up until year 9. If they want to, they can do GCSE. And if there's also the opportunity to do A-level. They summed up their views by saying, it was a nice to have, but in their view it was an outdated idea. So my decision to reject this proposal is based on the feedback I and others have had from both past and present professionals in education. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Ward.
Sir, can I just raise the defo on Deputy Moore, please?
Yes, you had already spoken. I was going to Deputy Sutton.
Thank you, sir. And I'll try and be brief because it's really quite an extensive subject that we're talking about today, and we heard a lot about people's individual experience during that. And I was reminded halfway through that the old accusation that used to be made to the Assembly was that they were acting as a 49-man planning committee, often the case, where everybody knows something about planning and can therefore make a contribution, and all of a sudden we've got 49 opinions as to whether that roof should go on there or not. And in a similar manner, everyone believes, and rightly, that they have some experience of schools, and therefore can tell us about education. We've all been to school. 70 years ago, when I started my education career in Bolton, in nursery education, experimental nursery classes in Bolton, back in 1953. My experience was, the one that sticks with me, is being made to take a rest in the afternoon, because I might tire myself out, poor little thing. And I should ignore Deputy Farnham, whatever it was. And I really resented this. I was a big grown-up boy. I was 3 years old. And I didn't have to have an afternoon sleep in the afternoon. They made me. They made me lie down on one of those scratchy mat. Yeah, somebody else has made the scratchy mat. For 3/4 of an hour or thereabouts. And it was just crazy. It really made no sense to me. So my experience from that, my experience of education would revolve around scratchy mats. Perhaps it does explain a lot. But what we've had, so the question becomes, do they still do that? Because I'm out of touch with that education. It's been, as I say, 70 plus years. So I wouldn't dare speak about kids in nursery schools now, because I am miles distance from that. Even my grandchildren leave me in the cold, as it were. But Deputy Balash and, in return, Deputy Joseph have done a great job of selling something to us. All the values which say, this is the pro, this is the pro, this is the pro, this is the pro, of going towards what they suggest, does not address, this is the con. So there's always a cost-benefit analysis to be done on anything. And we've heard about the benefits at length. Have we heard about the costs? No, we have not. Everything can be sorted out. Everything will be sorted out. We'll arrange the staff. Even got the impression that the staff, bilingual staff, with the right qualifications in the right place, will be flooding to us to come and conduct our experiment, because it would be an experiment at this stage. We are told that the staffing can be arranged, the matching curriculums can be arranged, the fact that the French don't start education at all until they're 6, whereas we start at 3, 4, 5. All sorts of things would need sorting out. So I would suggest that what we've done is what we've had is a selling job with all the pros and none of the cons. And we really have to consider some of the cons, because the money hasn't already been spent, but the money is already allocated to be spent in performing what is turning a good education system into something better. But I don't believe that this way forward is the best way forward. And as part of my experience in education, I spent a year in France working in a steel factory, in the steel industry, and in a nuclear plant. And I was immersed, I was speaking French every day, left, right, and centre, in those positions. And what I've ended up with is an ability to speak something like 40-year-old Parisian argot, which doesn't always go down well. And I tutoie the bosses, which I shouldn't, but I can't resist it. I don't address them as vous, but tutoie. I had experience of a language lab. Does anybody remember those? I don't think they... Oh, yes, two or three people there. A language lab where you're repeating the vowels ad nauseum. So, as my colleague, the deputy, has said, to know the difference between U and U. World of difference. But I know that, and I've practiced it for, it feels like years, but it can only have been a year. And where did that language lab go to with its big recording discs? Oh no, I won't go there. So we're told that the language of the heart is the thing that we need to address, not the language of the mind, and this is the way forward. What I say is that what we should do is leave education to the professionals. Leave it to the teachers, leave it to the head teachers. They know what they're doing. And they point out the problems associated with making this move and are very accurately outlining what's wrong with this way forward. Selling what is nice sounds lovely. As Liza Doolittle might have said, wouldn't it be lovely? It would be lovely to have warm hands, warm toes, warm feet. Oh, wouldn't it be lovely? It would be lovely, but actually what we need to do is look at the costs as well as the benefits and make a rational decision today not to proceed with this forward, no matter how nice it sounds.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Balash to respond.
So we have had a good debate, and I'm grateful to all members who have participated. I think there have been some powerful speeches on both sides of the argument, and I don't propose to deal with every point that has been made, but to concentrate on the essentials. The first thing I want to say is that the Minister gave the impression that this proposition ought not to have been brought. Deputy Feltham was more explicit, and she was joined by Deputy Southern in saying that I had completely misunderstood the practicalities and that educationalists should make this decision. I have not misunderstood the practicalities, but the suggestion that educationalists should make the decision is quite wrong. The job of teachers is to teach the curriculum. I would not dream of telling them how to do that. It is their job and their professional skill. But deciding what the curriculum should be is a different matter. That's a policy issue, which is the responsibility of the Minister or the states. Whether or not to establish bilingual schools is even more plainly the job of the Minister or the states if the matter is taken to the Assembly. It's not just an educational matter. It's a strategic issue affecting many things outside education. Of course, head teachers should be consulted, but the decision is not for them. I hope that most members will accept that this is a decision which it is right for them to determine. Bilingual schools will affect the characters and employment prospects of young people, the growth potential of the economy, as eloquently explained by Deputy Morel and indeed Deputy Ozuf this morning, and our identity as Jersey people, amongst other things. These are not matters solely for head teachers. The Minister talked of the importance of his priorities, but the Assembly is entitled to ask him to adjust his priorities if persuaded that something ought to be added. Strategic decisions fall within the competence of the states. The central issue, it seems to me, is whether members are persuaded that bilingual schools are, in principle, a good thing, and that bilingualism should be encouraged. The Constable of St. John appears to think otherwise, but I must say that he is out on a limb. Curiously, the Minister seems to accept that they are, in principle, desirable. He said that if I or one of my colleagues were to put forward a viable business plan to convert a school to bilingual teaching, he would support it. He must, therefore, in principle, be in favour of bilingual schools, because he would presumably not support such a project if he thought bilingual schools were intrinsically a bad thing. Supporting the principle, as he says he does, he ought to vote in favour of paragraph A of the proposition. But the Minister's proposal is disingenuous. He knows that...
Deputy, I have previously ruled that disingenuous is not parliamentary because it implies a knowing
May I respectfully say, sir, that I am not saying that the Minister is disingenuous. I'm saying that his proposal is disingenuous. I'm not. That is a different matter.
It is a different matter, which I accept that.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, indeed.
The Minister's proposal is disingenuous. He knows that no such project will come forward. My colleagues and I on the APF are being set up to fail. To convert a school to bilingual education needs political leadership and support from the department, and both those things are currently lacking. That could change if the states support this proposition, but now they are absent. Regrettably, the Minister is looking at the issue through the eyes of a teacher or administrator consumed by the humdrum problems of the classroom. I would like him to lift his eyes to the horizon and see matters from the perspective of an internationalist, aware of how bilingual education is expanding in the rest of the world. Look at what is happening in Europe rather than the UK, which is at or near the bottom of league tables for language skills. I didn't follow Deputy Mezek's story of his bilingual friends from Albania and Nigeria. He seemed to admire bilingualism, but the language skills of his friends were not derived from the UK education system. Members, I think, will have decided by now whether they are in favour of bilingualism. So I'm not going to repeat the evidence of the great advantages for speaking fluently in more than one language. Deputy Ozef made a very powerful case for bilingualism in his speech a few moments ago. I believe that a majority of members actually would like to be bilingual or would like their children to be bilingual. Many of us envy Deputies Alves and Tadier, their language skills. Bearing in mind that broad support for bilingualism and for the teaching of French, how is it to be advanced in primary schools? I am certainly not criticising our French teachers. As I said in my opening speech, much progress has been made in the last 10 years. The system, however, is against us. It locks us in to learning French as a subject, like maths or history, rather than being immersed in the language and absorbing it effortlessly through the skin. Immersion is the only way in which a quantum leap in the ability of our children to speak French can be made. If this proposition is lost, we will be stuck in our existing rut for years to come. I hope that members who are in favour, in principle, of bilingualism can find a way to vote for paragraph A. It is a vote in principle. That is what it says. Even if there are reservations about how teachers will be found, how the allocation of places will be arranged, how the curriculum can be translated very easily, actually, and other practical obstacles raised by the minister, a vote for the principle is not an irreversible vote for implementing the decision. It is a vote which lays the foundation for solutions to be found. Some small schools are struggling for numbers. Bilingual teaching could boost them. But if there are no solutions, if it proves impossible, for example, to find French language teachers for recruitment, despite all the existing support from Alliance, Bion, the French embassy, and so on, that is the end of the matter. A vote for paragraph A will, however, make it possible to look for solutions. Otherwise, the negativity that has dogged this debate will triumph. I do feel, I'm afraid, that the minister's approach has been, the answer is no. Now, what's the question? I hope that members who are in favour of bilingualism in principle will feel able to vote for paragraph A of the proposition. Paragraph B of the proposition asks the minister to conduct a survey of parents of preschool children to find out what their views are. Would they like to send their child to a bilingual school? It's market research. If the answer is that not enough parents are interested, again, that is the end of the matter. But it seems to me difficult to argue against an attempt to find out if the proponents of bilingual schools are right or wrong as to what the market wants. Let's suppose, just for the sake of argument, that 90% of respondents were in favour of sending their child to a bilingual school. I cannot believe that the minister would then say, I don't care what these parents want, I have my own priorities. Does the minister perhaps not want to risk knowing what parents of primary school children want? Might it be embarrassing for him to find out that there is quite a lot of support? I don't think that he has thought this matter through, or perhaps simply he has closed his mind to the arguments and is determined, whatever the evidence, that there will be no bilingual schools. But that's not consistent, on the other hand, with his offer to establish a bilingual school if a business case could be made for it. The minister's stance, frankly, is puzzling. However, whatever the minister's stance may be, I hope that members will take the logical step of voting for paragraph B. It commits members to nothing concrete, but it does lay the foundation with paragraph A to seeing whether the practical problems identified by the minister can be overcome. I understand, sir, that the Chief Minister has applied a 3-line whip to the Council of Ministers, and of course the Minister of Education is a member of the Reform Party with its block vote. On the face of it, I have an uphill struggle. I think the Chief Minister, if I may say so, made a mistake. This is not an issue of high government policy. It is a backbencher's proposition on which members have differing views. There should have been a free vote. The truth is that both the Reform Party and the Council of Ministers are divided. The Council of Ministers probably more so than the Reform Party. I have had much help from my fellow members of the APF in both Reform and the Council of Ministers, for which I am extremely grateful. It's been a positive experience to work across party lines and exemplifying what I thought the government itself stood for. I remind members that the Minister himself is in favour of the principle. He is prepared to support a bilingual school if someone else has done all the work to create the foundations. That is not a basis for imposing collective responsibilities and telling ministers not to vote for the proposition, even if in fact they support it. And collective responsibility does not in any event bind assistant ministers, although some appear to think that it does. If the ministers are persuaded of the merits of the argument, they should support it. I don't mind losing a debate on the merits. I do take great exception to losing a debate on the false premise of collective responsibility. So I hope that ministers, and indeed any other members who are still sitting on the fence, can bring themselves to vote for paragraphs A and B. I shall ask for separate votes, as already indicated, and I hope that such members can support A and B, even if they cannot support C. We should put children first. Multilingual learners must be supported, but so should the children without a second language. Article 30 of the Convention speaks of protecting minority culture. Jersey people are now in a minority in their own country, and they deserve protection for their cultural identity. What is needed, sir, is leadership from the Assembly. Nothing is lost by voting for paragraphs A and B. The idea may be bold and innovative, but it is not reckless. It is based upon what happens in Europe, in Canada, in China, and many other places. It's a long-term vision, but it's no good having a long-term vision if practical steps are not taken to achieve it. It reminds me actually of the struggle to establish the Institute of Law, in which I was involved. For years, the Law Society was vociferously in opposition to the concept. Then there was an EGM and lawyers realized the potential. No one would do without the Institute now. This is not a leap in the dark. Immersive education promises so much if it succeeds. If it fails, then of course it will fade away. But we will have tried. I don't believe it will fail, but it certainly will not succeed if we close our minds to it and don't give it a chance. So I move the amended proposition and I ask for the appel on each paragraph of the proposition.
So I would like
Deputy Gardner, did you have a point of...
Yes, from yourself, sir, or from the proposer, just to make sure that, because there's a proposition amendment, during the summing up, Deputy Balash mentioned that the paragraph A, it's in principle vote on bilingual schools, and paragraph B, it's also in principle about bilingual. If I understood correct, is a vote on specific English-French bilingual school and not a bilingual school as a concept.
Yes, it is English-French bilingual school. It says specifically that is the case in paragraph A.
So perhaps it's worth just rereading part A and B if it's not too much trouble. I know we don't normally do that, but...
No, I'm content to do that so that members understand. Do you have a point?
Sir, just a clarification from yourself. Does B work in isolation?
Yes. But C falls if B is not adopted, it seems to me. Very well. The appel is called for. I invite members who are not present to return to their seats, and I ask the greffier before we vote to read out the specific subparagraph. A.
Paragraph A, to approve in principle the conversion of at least 2 primary schools into English-French bilingual schools with the progressively phased introduction of bilingual tuition in these schools to begin with reception classes.
I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The Part A has been rejected. 15 votes pour, 26 votes contre, 1 abstention. Names, yes.
Those members voting pour the Connétable of St Brelard and St Juan, and Deputies Labby, Tadier, Moore, Osoph, Balash, War, Miles, Jearn, Ferry, Kovac, Alex Curtis, Barbara Ward and Andrews. Those members voting contre, the Connétable St Helier, Trinity, St Peter, St John, St Clement, Grouville, St Mary and St Saviour, and Deputies Southern, Luce, Doublé, Ayer, Rob Ward, Alves, Gardner, Farnham, Mesick, Coles, Scott, Renouf, Catherine Curtis, Beltham, Miller, Howell, Wilson, and Rose Binet, and Deputy Morell abstained.
We come now to the second vote, which was on paragraph B, and ask the greffier to read that apart.
Paragraph B, to request the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning to conduct a survey in cooperation with Statistics Jersey of the views of parents of preschool children as to the desirability of establishing bilingual English-French primary schools in Jersey and their willingness to send their children to such a school.
That is the vote. Then I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, I ask the greffier to close the voting. That part of the proposition has been adopted. 22 votes pour, 20 votes contre, no abstention. We then move on to vote on C because B has been adopted. The greffier would please read C.
To request the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning to appoint, subject to a positive outcome from the survey referred to in paragraph B above, an appropriately qualified project manager to ensure a smooth transition to bilingual teaching and to establish at least 2 bilingual English-French primary schools by the beginning of the academic year 2026 to 27.
I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And that part of the proposition has been defeated. 11 votes pour, 29 votes contre, 2 abstentions.
The comptes, please. The pours, please. I beg your pardon.
Those members voting pour the Conitard of St Brelard and St Clement, and deputies Tadier, Moore, Osoph, Balash, Miles, Jearn, Ferry, Kovac and Andrews. Those members voting contre the Conitard of St Helier, Trinity, St Peter, St John, Groovel, St Mary, St Saviour and St One, and deputies Southern, Labby, Luce, Doublé, Ayer, Rob Ward, Alves, Gardner, Farnham, Mesick, Coles, Scott, Renov, Catherine Curtis, Feltham, Miller, Al, Alex Curtis, Barbara Ward, Wilson and Rose Binet, and the abstentions were deputies Morell and Wall.
The question arose during the course of this debate as to the use of the term disingenuous. At that point, I accepted what Deputy Balash indicated, that he was referring to the Minister's plan rather than the Minister himself. On further reflection, I do not think the use of the word disingenuous was appropriate in all of the circumstances, because the Deputy then went on to say of the Minister, he knows his plan will not happen. And if someone offers something which they know will not happen, they are acting disingenuously, in my view, and therefore it is an ad hominem statement as opposed to a general statement about principle, and I rule that as being out of order, Deputy. Very well. We can now come on to the next item, the Draft Income Support Jersey Amendment Regulations, P.59, lodged by the Minister for Social Security. The main respondent is the Chair of the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Income Support Jersey Amendment Regulations 2000. The states make these regulations under Articles 5 and 18 of the Income Support Jersey Law 2007.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to be bringing income support regulations to the Assembly today. As Minister for Social Security, I have many responsibilities, but members will know I have always had a strong interest in ensuring that income support is able to keep up with rising costs on our island. It will always be my priority to support people who need help. Income support is an important part of Jersey's social safety net, and it helps to protect people on the lowest incomes from the impact of changes in the cost of food, rent and daily living expenses, amongst a range of other costs met through this benefit. I have therefore proposed a rise in income support components of 4%. This increase is slightly higher than the most recent annual increase in the low-income RPI figures published by Statistics Jersey yesterday. This means that income support components reflect the recent increases in costs in Jersey experienced by income support households. The only component that I will not be increasing in January 2025 is the clinical cost component. The reason for this is that this was originally included within the income support system to support the full cost of GP visits. With the introduction of the Health Access Scheme in 2020, everyone included in an income support household is able to use primary care services at much reduced prices. And I was pleased to reduce the cost of GP surgery visits further under the Health Access Scheme from £12 to £10 earlier this year. Given the significant reduction in primary care costs for income support households, I do not believe it is necessary to also increase the clinical cost components at this point in time. Despite the reassurances of the planned increases, I am aware that many islanders will be sensitive to the possibility that daily living costs will continue to rise. I really do want to ensure them that I will continue to monitor cost of living pressures during 2025. The estimated cost of the extra support is £3.2 million, and this is allowed for in the 2025 budget. I hope that members will support these regulations, and I propose the principles.
Are the principles seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Sutton?
Yes, sir. Could I just ask the Minister whether she would extend the information that we have to rental support in the public and in the private sector?
Deputy Doublé.
Thank you, Sir. As the Chair of the Health and Social Security panel, I would like to inform members that the panel are supportive of this, and we thank the Minister for offering information to the panel about it.
Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? No other member wishes to speak on the principles? I close the debate and call on the Minister to respond.
Thank you, Sir. Just to respond to Deputy Southern's question around housing cost components, I am always willing to speak to members and constituents about housing cost components. Of course, the housing cost component does cover housing costs within the social rented sector, and income support recipients living in the social rented sector will also see increases when their rents increase as well. I do understand that there is additional pressure within the private rental sector, and I, of course, continue to work with my colleague, the Housing Minister, as he works to deal with that issue as well. I thank the scrutiny panel for its support, and as always, I value the contributions of the panel and the way that it works with me as a minister. Thank you, sir. I call for the appel.
Appel is called for. Invite members not in the Assembly room to enter the chamber, and the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. Members had the opportunity of casting their vote. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The principles have been adopted. 39 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. Deputy Doublé, does your panel wish to call the matter in?
No, thank you, sir.
How do you wish to propose in second reading, Minister?
En bloc, please, sir.
Is it seconded for second reading? Yes, sir. Does any member wish to speak in second reading? Those in favour of adopting in second reading kindly show. Those against? Adopted in second reading. Do you move in third reading, Minister?
En bloc, please, sir.
Is it seconded for third reading? Yes, sir. Does any member wish to speak in third reading? Those in favour of adopting?
Call for the appel.
Well, that was interesting. Firstly, Deputy Curtis, you put on your, or Deputy Curtis, I think, put on your light to speak and then stood up, and everyone else stood up. So I think what we'll do is assume the appel has been called for. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Right, very well. I invite members to return to their seats and ask the greffier to open the voting. The vote is on the regulations in third reading. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. And the regulations have been adopted in third reading, 42 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions. Very well, the next item is the Gender Pay and Income Ratio Consultation, P.45, lodged by Deputy Andrews. The main responder will be the Chief Minister, and I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to request the Chief Minister to conduct a consultation with non-public sector entities on the reporting of gender pay and income ratios, with a view to presenting the findings of the consultation to the Assembly no later than January 2026.
Yes, Deputy.
Thank you, sir. I take pride in bringing forward this proposition before the States Assembly, and really it's a follow-up from P.45 2023, and the States Assembly approved that proposition to establish gender pay and income ratio reporting across every single government department. And of course, the Council of Ministers at the time also lodged an amendment, and that was really Deputy Jean's work, to encourage ALOs and state-owned entities to also report such information. And for me, I feel quite passionate about this area, about income inequality and also gender pay as well, because it is a problem. And even the OECD have established this to be a concern. And since the 1990s, steps have been taken to try and reduce gender pay gaps that do exist, and also to reduce the inequalities that we see, especially across global north states. And initially, some positive work was done and the gender pay gap was coming down. But what the OECD discovered is since the financial crash in 2008, the progress that was made has tended to stagnate, and in some cases there has also been a bit of a regression with some of the data that has been published. And I personally, as a male, I feel it's absolutely essential that we are taking steps forward as a legislature, like other states have done. In the OECD, for instance, there's 38 states who are part of the 2021 report, and of those 38 states, 21 states had some form of reporting. And the reporting is in place to try and address the discrepancies that exist. Now, some of those states have gone a step further. 10 of the states have, in actual fact, got an enforcement policy where they are questioning firms in terms of how they are going to reduce the gap that exists from the data that's been published. Now, I personally would say that potentially is maybe a step too far when you're looking at the enforcement aspect. But what I'm really asking for is a cultural change. We really need to be seeing firms who are willing to publish their information, because it's not just about the information being published and the information being given to the government. In some cases, across some of the OECD states, the unions, for instance, in Finland and Sweden, are the representatives who receive the gender pay data, and it is they who then communicate with the employers about it. And I think it's crucial because we need to know this information. We need to see progression. We need to see incomes boost. And I think for women especially, it is difficult for them. If you want to maybe start a family, most often it will be women who take time out of the labour market, and therefore they miss out on opportunities to maybe see upward social mobility due to that. And it's a difficult decision between putting your career first, or is it the time now to then start a family? And so the data really here that the OECD have produced across all the states, it's shown that there is a gender pay gap across all the states, with Korea standing at 31%, that's the highest, and Belgium standing at the lowest. And unfortunately, the OECD average is 11.9%, so much work has to be taken to try and address that. And speaking of income inequality and gender pay reporting in Jersey, I understand that there are a number of different firms who are reporting that information already, and I have to say it's good on them for doing that, because I think it's absolutely critical that this information is reported, and ideally the information should be reported into the government. And the reason for that is due to the government having the ability to then formulate policies to try and address the gender pay and income ratio disparities that potentially do exist. But without reporting such information, how do we know what the extent of the gender pay gap and also what the extent is of the income ratio across different firms is? It's important that the government is the enabler. The government has to engage with non-public sector entities, and if we are not doing it across the board, then we do not know what disparities exist. And that's the issue we have here, because other states have taken the initiative. And it's in the name, gender pay gap. It exists. You cannot deny the fact that there is a problem, and it ought to be addressed. It ought to be addressed. And with the 21 states who have done the right thing, in my view, they have taken action, and 17 of those states have now established gender pay gap bodies where such information is reported into them. And I think that is very, very beneficial because they are taking decisive action. But there are complexities, and we must acknowledge those complexities from a human resources perspective in terms of the reporting of such information, because all the states report information differently. So if you look at Israel, for instance, they have the second highest gender pay gap percentage, but they only report information if there are 518 employees or more. So what about all the other firms who've got, say, 50 or 100 employees upwards to 580? Those firms are not reporting their information. And so there is a potential gathering of information that could provide more informed data for policy officials in the Israeli government, but that's not happening. And so how do you compare Israel to the UK, for instance, who've set a mandatory requirement of 250 employees, and for such firms to then report their information? So we have to bear in mind the data series that the OECD have developed. Although it's good, it's beneficial to have an observation to look at all the information that's there, but again, there are a number of inconsistencies, and I just think that's important to acknowledge. But from a human resources perspective, there are difficulties, and I've had a couple of discussions about this. How do you, for instance, report full-time, part-time, fixed-term, zero-hour contract, interim, and also self-employed individuals? And this is where the government has to come in, because everybody at the moment who is reporting such information, there is no joined-up approach. They are left to their own devices to establish a framework for gender pay and income ratio reporting, because the government has not really got involved. And I think this is an opportunity for the government to consult with non-public sector entities, including the unions, to establish what information is currently out there that's being reported, and also to engage those employers who, for instance, have reservations about gender pay and income ratio reporting, because I think they also should contribute to this consultation. And that's all I'm asking for. Let's consult with non-public sector entities before we then go ahead potentially in the future and introduce legislation. Because I think we have to hear all views, and we also have to understand the complexities for businesses. Because the government here can provide a helping hand. The government can provide the templates if necessary, and I think that would be very beneficial for all of those businesses. But we also have to establish what framework and what information would be part of that template for businesses. I think that's absolutely crucial that we do that work. And so I think it's a good opportunity for us to ensure that a consultation does take place, to ensure that the government is informed, because we need to have a broad range of views that form part of this consultation, so the government is better informed about what policies they should have in place in the future. Now, I know Deputy Farnham is rather antithetical about introducing legislation. I think he's more of the opinion he wants to try and encourage firms, and I know there are other politicians who would probably, again, oppose his view in that respect, because they would be of the opinion that legislation is the right thing, and it's probably the right time to bring into force. And I know the comments paper mentioned concerns about enforcing firms in terms of the publication of their data, or if there's potentially any inaccuracies in the data series that they develop. And I just want to say this is the reason why we are engaging non-public sector entity firms, because we are the decision-making body, and I don't think we have to put anything forward that is punitive. I think it's about working with them, it's about supporting them where the help is necessary, and it's also understanding with the current firms who are reporting, what information are they reporting? Because by the time in the future, if the State Assembly decides, look, we are going to introduce reporting requirements, we could have half of the firms who are reporting information, but that information is not, it's not relative to what the information, data information that the government want them to report, because they've been doing their own thing and now they're being asked to change the reporting requirements that they have. And that's a big concern, and I did mention it to Deputy Owls in a meeting with herself and one of the lead officers on this. If we are not intervening now, and if we are not discussing with non-public sector entities the way how we report, then we are going to see non-public sector entities report, and they are going to see inconsistent reporting across the board. And that is a major concern of mine. Whereas in other states, what they have done is they try to ensure that there is a consistent line of reporting, and I think that is absolutely the right way to go. Now, I also discussed my proposition with a member of the Diversity Network. And they commended me for lodging this proposition because, again, they're very much pro-gender pay and income ratio reporting. But the one thing that they did say is they don't feel as though that the Council of Ministers have really engaged with them. There's only been one informal discussion. I know that formed part of the comments paper, and they feel that more actions have to take place. Because I think there is a lobbying group now. They do feel that there has to be the initiative being used from the Council of Ministers, from the government, to establish a proper framework to try and assist firms, firstly, without the need for legislation. But if nothing is being done, then I think there probably will be a call for such legislation to be brought forward, especially for them. And I think that is understandable. Because they've not really seen the Council of Ministers take any steps forward to try and aid firms. And I think we need to see that happen, because at the moment, if work is being done, it's been inconspicuous. And I think we need to be more conspicuous with this. We need to be more bold, and we need to assist firms. We really do. Because in my view, the gender pay gap, as it currently stands across the OECD, and who knows what it's going to be like here in Jersey, it has to be addressed. And it's for assemblies across the OECD to take decisive action. And so far, I've not seen any action be taken. So I think this consultation is an enabler. It's going to allow the States Assembly to be informed about some of the issues that face firms, but also some of the benefits of the information that we receive, because again, that will allow us to have better informed decision-making when it comes down to the potential of policy formulation as well. So I think that's absolutely critical, and I hope that other members do contribute to this debate, because I think it's a well worthwhile proposition, and I also look forward to hearing the views of the Chief Minister and Deputy House as well. So thank you, sir.
Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak? Deputy.
Thank you, sir. And I thank the Deputy for bringing such a proposition to be discussed. And just as an update for the P31 as amended, I have been pressuring and writing questions to the government regularly to find out how that has been progressing with P31. And recently I got a response from, to a written question that 5 out of 6 of the specified organisations do report their gender pay and income ratio, and the 6th one being very specific reasons why not. I've just had a look within some of the reports that had been linked to the responses, and yes, there is some gender pay analysis. Not everyone is actually doing income ratio. That is a different issue and different analysis altogether. So I do question that, but also I think I would bring up what Deputy Andrew said about the fact that we even within the government and then these specified organisations, we don't know if the framework that they use is all the same. And so I would really highlight that even within the government and their extensions, do we know that there is the same frameworks being used and doing that kind of analysis? And just to bring up that I also had to request, after asking, because it wasn't put in the first time to my answer, about arm's length organisations as well. And of the 13 arm's length organisations that would be identified as to be reporting, only 3 at the moment volunteer their gender pay and income ratio. And so I would encourage those that do not to actually start doing that as is requested by P31 as amended, and to take that forward. And so hopefully by the end of 2024 we can have a good view of, at least within the government sphere, what is happening. But why are we asked? Why is Deputy Andrews? But why is others like Deputy Dubélé, myself, and others really pushing about gender pay gap? Well, I can give you some statistics about Jersey. So in 2023, PwC reported that closing the gender pay gap in Jersey could generate an astounding 170 million boost to female earnings, 187 million in Jersey. And this just isn't just an increase in individual incomes, it's a 17.3 million boost in income tax revenues. 17.3 million boost in income tax revenues, and an additional 3.5 million in social security contributions. So we can see that there are tangible benefits that would strengthen our public services and create more resilient economy for everyone, as well as families and female individuals who will also get a boost to help them with the cost of living. So it's directly linked to the cost of living issue. So if we were to match Jersey's female labour force participation rate to that of Sweden, and Deputy Andrews mentioned Sweden, we could boost Jersey's GDP by 2% annually, equating to about £77 million. This are the numbers that we are talking about when we are seeing the gender pay gap being real and alive in Jersey. And it's within our grasp. We can do this. And also, access to talent and skills is a continual priority for businesses in Jersey. It is also for the government within their common strategic priorities. However, and we are also facing a critical skills gap. There are hundreds of vacancies that are unfilled, and many of these could be taken by women who have to choose between caring responsibilities and their careers, or once when they get into their careers, they find that that gap only widens. And we saw that within the last Jersey-wide gender pay gap report that the previous government published, where we saw even a massive increase in the finance industry with those women over 55 who worked in the finance industry, and I believe the gap was about 80% between men and women over 55, but please don't quote me on that, and look for yourselves to see the real figures. But the gender pay gap doesn't stop at earnings, because it also creates the gender pension gap, with serious implications for our ageing population. And we also recognise that we have a cost of living crisis within our ageing population. So on average, women live longer than men, and so need more pension wealth to achieve the same income over their retirement. Yet due to pay differentials throughout their careers, they're left with far less. And this was highlighted not just in Jersey, but actually the Pensions Policy Institute in 2019 in putting in evidence for the UK government and for the Lords when they were discussing their gender pay gap discussions, and how they ended up making it mandatory, was one of the areas was not just about females within the workforce, but also those in pension and having difficulty. And why do we need this reporting? Because it shines a light on disparities we face. But this is just a start. It's just to highlight data, and we always talk about how important data is to highlight those disparities, because the real work begins when we identify the causes of the gap. And then to try to reduce that gap, we need action plans. And we need clear action plans to find out how to close that gap. And this is not just at the government level. This is every business who then will start reporting on their gender pay gap. They need to not just be reporting for reporting's sake, and I would request that for the ALOs and the specified organisations who have taken on board P31 and have started to report on their gender pay gap. What are you going to do about it? What are your actions? And unfortunately, when I asked that question to the government themselves, they responded that they won't be doing an action plan. Now, what is the point of reporting if you don't work out what the causes of that gap is, but also how to close that gap. So when we're discussing gender pay gap reporting, it's not just a nice to have because then it can just be like, look, tick, we've done it. Actually, what the real catalyst for change is an action plan where we can transform the system from a monitoring tool to a change tool that guarantees real progress. So closing this gender pay gap is not just a step towards equality, but it's a step towards a stronger, more inclusive economy. And I hope everyone in the States today, my colleagues, will remember those figures that I mentioned before about how much females could earn to help them and their families with the cost of living, but also how much that could also generate for the public services into the future with tax income. And there is also, as Deputy Andrews mentioned, there is a clear demand for this work. And myself and a number of other colleagues within the Chamber are members of Mind the Gap campaign group, which we have about 100 very powerful, very dynamic cross-section of women, mainly women, but we also have very vocal men within that group who are demanding for this to happen. And it clearly, as I mentioned before, weaves into the benefits of the common strategic priorities of the current Council of Ministers. Now, I know the Council of Ministers report mentioned that they are doing something, or they state they are doing something in persuading companies to do reporting, that they want to provide a universal framework and reporting standard so that everyone, all businesses in Jersey can utilise and access that. And we hear you, and we will be pushing for those things to happen. And I know that the Mind the Gap campaign group will also be expecting to see deliveries happening as soon as possible because they are active, very, very active, and they want change, and we need to see change. So I am, on behalf of the group, requesting that we actually see regular updates of those changes and the actions that have been identified in the Council of Ministers report, so that we can actually get to a point where we have companies not just reporting on their data, but also having action to actually close that gap. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Deputy Doublé.
Thank you, sir. I'm very pleased to follow Deputy Jean, one of the other States members who I think is as passionate as I have always been about this issue. And I want to thank Deputy Andrews for his proposition, which was a surprise to me, a very pleasant surprise. And it is always really good to see male allies also advocating for change in this area. And so this proposition, when members look at the actual wording of the proposition, is very, very moderate. It's a very moderate proposition, and actually I would say it doesn't go far enough, and that we need to be discussing something that goes beyond this proposition. But it's a very good start. To give an idea of what the current expert view is, and Deputy Andrews mentioned this, I did some research of my own and spoke to a former senior economist for the UK government, and that individual was absolutely adamant that the evidence shows that even mandatory reporting legislation would not go far enough to create change in this area, that the legislation actually needs to have penalties attached to it, and those need to be financial penalties. And that is what the research and the expert opinion is in this area at the moment. So that just shows members, sir, how far behind Jersey is. Personally, I would prefer to see incentives rather than penalties. I would like the government actually to be considering tax breaks for companies who publish their pay gap data, and I think that's something that should form part of these talks to encourage companies to publish. Some companies are already publishing. Jersey Post are not only publishing their data, but today, this morning, Sarah, they are actually holding an event to help other companies in the publication of their data. So change is happening, but it's been very slow, given that the first gender pay gap review was published, I think, in 2018, which is now, 2019, sir. Several years ago now. So in terms of what measures need to be taken to tackle this issue effectively, I'm going to talk briefly about some of those measures to demonstrate to members that actually Deputy Andrews' proposition today is really the very least that we can do. And I do think that government should be voting for this proposition because it very simply asks them to consult with private sector entities to have a conversation. It doesn't prescribe what this should look like. It doesn't need to be elaborate or difficult. In fact, so I was a little bit confused by the comments for this proposition. From what I understand from those comments, that consultation is already happening on some level, and that was confirmed in the comments. And actually, I think that the comments, it shows that government have already gone further than that. So I would really like government to vote for this today. One of the paragraphs in the comments states that currently discussions are ongoing with partners in the private sector with the intention of working together to bring forward guidance to set out expectations for reporting and to provide a single universal framework for businesses to work from. So that is great news, and the campaign group that Deputy Jean spoke of that we're part of, and absolutely delighted to see the campaigning and the kind of grassroots feelings behind this issue. That campaign group were really, really pleased to see that. They were celebrating that. And I hope that government hear that and see what an impact that those moves have made. I know from conversations I've had with the Social Security Minister, she's already on top of several of the incomplete recommendations from these previous scrutiny reviews, sir, and that there are several members of this government that really do get it and who are willing to move forwards in their thinking with this. Another conversation I had with Deputy Morell, and I've had conversations with Deputy Alves, and we are setting up a meeting to discuss this area and specifically to find some common ground on some things that we can move forwards on. And those discussions will be informed by the campaign group. And I think it would be helpful if Deputy Andrews attended as well. I know Deputy Jean will be attending as well. And this is a complex area, sir, and perhaps it does need some more conversations and some more of that collaboration and joint working, because I recall when I did the first gender pay gap review panel, it was such a learning curve. It was a huge learning curve. We learnt a lot, and we learnt that women do get paid less in the workplace for a very, very long list of reasons, and all of which are interconnected. And I think the very first thing that we learnt about when we did that first review actually was the difference between equal pay and gender pay. And work across the Assembly to see the recommendations from these two scrutiny reports, which actually had several members from government, Deputy Morell and Deputy Mezek. We had members across the Assembly, Constable of St Martin, to address these factors. The previous government are childcare, for one, is one of the recommendations addressing the childcare issues. But as we are taking action on all of these issues, how are we going to measure it? Pay gap reporting tells us if all of this work is having an impact or not. It's a barometer of equality in our island, equality between men and women. And closing this pay gap, as Deputy Jean has said, making our island more equal for men and women, and this would benefit men too, okay, because they would have benefits in the home. They would get to spend more time with their children if they were taking on more of those caring responsibilities. It would have huge benefits for our economy. I won't repeat what Deputy Jean mentioned. It's a productivity issue. It's the intelligence and the skills of countless women not being used to their fullest potential in the workplace, despite statistics showing that girls outperform boys at all levels of education. Women are still denied the same opportunities as men to work in senior roles. the benefits from one of the evidence that we collected in one of the reports, the benefits for companies who have gender diversity and a smaller pay gap, a more diverse workforce, the benefits are reputational, decreased turnover of staff, increased productivity, increased performance, a wider talent pool, and increased profits for that business. And so we're about to spend 20 million on productivity if the Assembly approves that. That money could go a lot further if it was spent in conjunction with some of the measures from the recommendations in these scrutiny reports. We're miles behind, I'm afraid to say, but we can catch up. We have a roadmap, and we've already started on the path. We need to really put our minds to this across the Assembly together. The UK have had pay gap reporting for 8 years. The new Labour government are going even further. They are introducing legislation that will make gender-based action plans mandatory, and they are asking specifically for a focus on menopausal women and what accommodations they need in the workplace. That's groundbreaking to me, because that will then address, and I'm assuming the UK have a similar issue to that which we have around women over 55 leaving the workplace, being underpaid in the workplace. They are also going to be implementing pay gap reporting for ethnicity and disability. We must not forget those issues as well. It's not just women who are being discriminated against in the workplace or who are being subjected to unconscious, that's not overt bias, but unconscious bias, because it's not always intentional, sir. So this is an extremely moderate proposition. Government are already doing this. I'd like government to support it, and I would like members to support this.
Thank you very much, Deputy Alves.
Thank you, sir. Deputy Andrews proposes that we consult with businesses about the gender pay gap, but without any details as to what exactly we should consult upon or the intentions behind doing so. So we have explained our reasons for resisting mandatory gender pay gap reporting in our comments on P.13 2024, and again in our comments to this proposition, so I will not repeat them. However, I will say getting good data is important, but it's also not so different from enforcement. We need to be able to check that the data is right, and how do you ensure you have good data with no enforcement? So we've, as a government, have resisted calls to add a layer of bureaucracy to businesses purely to gather data to inform us that there is a problem, when we can easily extrapolate from other jurisdictions and from government's own reporting that there is a gender pay gap in Jersey. We know this, and we are more interested in addressing the real underlying issues. So instead, we have invested our energy and resources into practical actions towards improving equality in general by moving to a living wage, reducing GB costs, providing more affordable homes, as well as making school meals available in all states' primary schools. We have also committed to policies intended to specifically address gender inequality, including the gender pay gap, by extending nursery and childcare provision. We are also fully committed to progressing the recommendations of the Task Force on Violence Against Women and Girls. So we do not support the request to undertake a process of consultation with businesses, as we have been working towards doing so anyway. Since we have established that no suitable model for mandatory gender pay gap reporting scales effectively to Jersey's smaller size, we have been trying to develop a cost-effective and proportionate way to encourage businesses to report rather than require them to do so. The costs of gender pay gap bodies, for example, or reporting arrangements do not scale down in a linear way. Small jurisdictions always have difficulties with this in regulatory work. Recently, at my request, sir, officers met with the Diversity Network to discuss the possibility of joining up our work in this area with the ongoing efforts of the network to encourage gender pay gap reporting. Discussions are ongoing, but we have tentatively agreed to jointly develop a reporting template that businesses can choose to engage with which the government can endorse as the standard of reporting in Jersey. I have also asked officers to attend today's event hosted by the JEC, which is currently taking place, and I thank Deputy Dublé for circulating that information to members about it earlier in the week. And I have asked officers to continue the conversation with the Diversity Network and wider business community to consult on practical ways in which that could be refined and implemented, and how ongoing support for businesses might best be provided. So in summary, sir, we reject this proposition because no consultation on mandatory gender pay gap reporting would resolve the underlying issues with applying it in Jersey. And also, sir, as we already have made, we have already made a plan to engage with businesses on voluntary reporting. So we really do want to try and get a universal advisory framework in place, and we are in the early stages of work and hope that this will progress quickly. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? No other member. Deputy Farnham.
So if I can just follow briefly, Deputy Alves, on this. And as she said, this is a work in progress. We're working collaboratively with the Diversity Network, and we're very open to that, and we'll continue to do that. Under the leadership of Deputy Alves, engagement is accelerating. And so we're already doing the work, and we're going to continue to do it. I think we've made the argument again and again about mandatory gender pay gap reporting and how we don't believe that's the best way to tackle the problem. But we accept there is a problem. We see it in our own state's reporting of the state's workforce, and we are committed to tackling it. So I'd ask members to reject this proposition, and we will continue with the work we're doing and build upon the engagement, sir. And I just wanted to reassure members that there is a priority for the government and Deputy Ells and her team. I have confidence will lead it and deliver, continue to deliver, and hopefully so we can work collaboratively to bring down, to reduce the gender pay gap. Thank you.
Deputy Meze.
Thank you, sir. In the previous term of office, I served on the gender pay gap review panel for the second part of its work. It did a follow-up review and produced a report with findings and recommendations to the government that articulated things that the government ought to do in pursuit of better gender pay gap reporting. Going through that process was enlightening for me. I learned a lot from it, and I completely support what the report concluded and the recommendations it made to the government, including that a consultation should be undertaken in this area. And I actually go, I think, a bit further than the government's comments on this, just speaking in a personal capacity, in that I think it would be right at some point to get to a position of mandatory gender pay gap reporting. But I say in that whilst that in itself would be a good and informative thing, that act itself wouldn't improve anyone's life directly. It would just give us data that we could use to potentially extrapolate from it solutions to then go on to improve people's lives. So I don't think that it is something that's worth over-egging in its importance. The important things to be getting on with are the measures that we know, without having to conduct any kind of scientific exercise, would logically lead to reducing Jersey's gender pay gap. And there's all sorts of family-friendly initiatives that we can be pursuing. The Education Minister's work on expanding nursery places will obviously have a good impact in that. Raising the minimum wage to a living wage will obviously have a good impact on that, and that is logical that will happen, and we don't need more data to tell us that, which is why I think the need for mandatory reporting is not the urgent part of this. That's something that we don't need to rush. In terms of this proposition, though, sir, the proposition technically is of no effect because it's asking for something that is already being done to be done. That means that if the Assembly votes in favour of the proposition, nothing changes. And if the Assembly votes against the proposition, because it's not a proposition framed as telling us to stop consulting, then guess what? Nothing happens either. And so whilst in a sense it's a good opportunity to air the issues and reiterate our positions on the broader subject, as an actual worded proposition, it is kind of meaningless and doesn't actually take us forward, because that consultation work is already going on. So the comments paper that the Council Ministers have put together says, currently discussions are ongoing with partners in the private sector, including the Diversity Network, with the intention of working together to bring forward guidance to set out expectations for reporting and to provide a single universal framework for businesses to work from. The expectation is to provide government backing to private sector innovation to develop a product that is usable and relevant to Jersey, and working with the private sector to generate a self-sustaining support network to assist companies to develop the knowledge and processes to report effectively. Wider consultation with businesses will take place on the basis of that framework. So it's already happening. I'm just of the view that it's not the best use of our time to specifically debate a motion on something that's already happening and is therefore meaningless. It's actually a better use of our time to debate motions on things that we know would have a positive impact in reducing the gender pay gap. There's all sorts of things that we could be getting on with that members from across the Assembly are entitled to propose that would be more tangible in the effect that they would have, rather than asking to do a consultation which itself won't directly lead to change and is happening anyway. So I would just suggest that the debate on this worded proposition doesn't really take us forward, and I won't vote for it on that basis. But in the agenda on reducing the gender pay gap, I think it would be a good use of our time in future to debate tangible propositions that will help us get to reducing it, and that, in my view, would be a better use of time.
Right, Deputy Moore.
Thank you, sir. Actions speak louder than words, sir, and this is a simple proposition that is asking a government to conduct some action and activity where, sadly, we are seeing none. I have to say, sir, that I was deeply disappointed and I was prompted to speak after hearing the words of Deputy Alves, who simply read out a pre-prepared speech, clearly by an officer, because it seemed so very different and distant from the words that she has uttered herself from her own, what have been previously demonstrated to be her own strongly held views on this matter, where she has engaged with other states members and championed such causes, and it's disappointing to hear such a change of tack. There are serious social issues, sir, that could be addressed through some consultation, which this proposition is requesting. It is sad, in effect, that we are having to ask this government to engage in some simple engagement and consultation with with islanders and with businesses, and that businesses themselves are actually taking matters into their own hands because they see such a lack of leadership in this area from the current government. And we have to praise both Jersey Electricity and also HSBC, who are taking matters into their own hands and conducting events of their own accord, because they see that there are social issues that can be addressed and need to be addressed both in harmony with government and private enterprise if we are to achieve change in particularly important areas such as participation in the workforce and turning around our greatly declining birth rate, which is, and it should be, one of the number one factors that bothers members of our public, members of this Assembly, because it will have a serious and deleterious effect on the future of this island if they are not taken into hand and grappled with. And so, sir, commend Deputy Andrews for bringing a simple proposition. I feel it's very sad that he's having to do so. The government should take a good, strong look at themselves and be ashamed of themselves, in fact, for their lack of action and their lack of activity. We were told when they came into power 9 months ago that they would be a government of action. Well, I'm afraid, sir, we have seen none of this action in 9 months. They should be ashamed of themselves for their woeful performance, and I will happily support this proposition.
Very much. Deputy Wills.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't going to speak on this, but a number of issues have arisen in the debate. Yesterday we heard from the Chief Minister how the government's public sector efficiency programme means a greater involvement of the private sector in the delivery of key public services. And it leads us to ask the question, how might we prepare for this in the context of the gender pay gap situation? We know that many public sector roles are at the lower end of the pay scale. Many of those roles are undertaken by women. Many of those women work part-time, juggling 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. And this is the same in the private sector. Moves to apply a living wage will assist in raising the income levels, but the fundamental issue is whether the work women do is considered of equal value to the work men do, and if we are making progress in this matter. Given what we've just heard from Deputy Jean on the economics of the gender pay gap, I personally feel it's vital for us to have a better understanding of where the inequality is in the employment space in the island. And I accept that the government may have an incremental approach to working with businesses to produce data. But isn't this an opportunity to form a really good partnership with the private sector to understand the wider issues? This is about a commitment. What we're being asked to do is to make a decision on whether we want to consult about this or not, whether we believe there is a way to improve our collective understanding. I think it's a weak argument to suggest that just because you haven't been given any clarity on what information to collect, then you shouldn't support the proposition. It's incumbent upon you as a government to develop the curiosity in this agenda, if nothing else, and to be an intelligence-led government, one that understands the community, and a government that isn't making populist decisions and supporting and encouraging inertia. Government needs to start to look at the ways in which modern HR practice is moving in the direction that will be supported through this proposition. It has to be more informed in its decision-making. It has to be more curious about what's going on in that space. And it has to be more proactive in working with the private sector to develop the kind of partnership working that will actually reduce the inequality. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Deputy Feltham.
Thank you, sir. I have to say I'm quite disappointed by the assertions made by previous speakers, including the former Chief Minister, because I do remember sitting in a room with the former Chief Minister as Vice President of SLC at the time, having to chase for many weeks, I think it could have actually been months, for a response from her government on the scrutiny gender pay gap report. So to accuse this government that is taking action of not taking action is actually, I think, incorrect. I think, as Deputy Alves very well put out, we are taking action, and our focus is on action rather than reports and reviews. And I do want to make the point that propositions like this, that, as Deputy Mezek explained, have actually no effect, do actually run the risk of setting us back where we are actually making good strides and progress. And I would prefer to focus on the actions that I'm taking. And I can speak as Social Security Minister, and I can confidently say that I have looked at where I can make a difference, a real tangible difference in this space. I know that research has shown that pay transparency is a very practical measure that really does make a real impact when people are looking for jobs. So when we see jobs being advertised with negotiable pay, we know that women will very often negotiate for less pay than men. We also know, as Deputy Dublé pointed out, that there are possible ethnicity and disability pay gaps as well, which also need to be addressed. So for me, I looked at where I, within my responsibility, can make a real tangible effect. And I am also responsible within my department for the Jobs in Jersey website. So I've already asked my officers to look at how we can encourage and ensure better pay transparency on the Jobs in Jersey site and ensure that the employers that they are working with and dealing with on a regular basis, as well as the employees, understand the importance of that pay transparency. So my officers will be working on this to make it clear that there is a preference for all employers advertising on Jobs in Jersey to give clear salary information. I'm really keen to progress this and not to focus on conducting consultations and writing reports, because I think it will help to promote better and consistent pay for all groups. And once those changes are live, I've also asked for better communications to be issued to explain why these changes are being made and the importance of pay transparency. That is real action.
Thank you. Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I would just like to correct a statement made by Deputy Moore, which was that Deputy Alves was reading a speech pre-prepared by an officer. Sir, I returned to the chamber earlier and I did not ask Deputy Alves to let me pass to my seat because I could see she was so busy working on her speech, finalising details and responding to comments made during the debate. So I would suggest that Deputy Moore should withdraw that comment.
Thank you. Deputy Moore, did you...
Sir, I'm grateful to Deputy Curtis for giving that explanation, and I withdraw it, although I remain disappointed by the tone of her speech. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Next member to speak is the Connaught Harbour St Clement.
Thank you, sir. Let's see if I can get rid of the cobwebs and start again. So I'm a simple chap. I've worked in hospitality for a long, long time, and I recall in the late 70s there was no minimum pay, and there was no push to have people on a similar wage, but there was a list of recommended pay for all the elements of staff in hospitality, from head chefs, sous chefs, chambermaids, kitchen porters, etc., etc. And there was one disparity between waiters and waitresses. Waitresses were paid 17% less than waiters for some obscure reason. And as a young manager, I may have told this story before, but as a young manager, I queried this with our managing director. We had 3 hotels which I ran, and he couldn't give me an understanding, but said that this was recommended by the Hospitality Association. But our company changed it straight away. So I'm not new to this. I've always queried why females are paid less than men in many areas. I don't understand it. We have the same brains. We have the same number of digits and arms and legs and all that sort of situation. The only reason is, I can understand, is this goes back to prehistory, the days of the caveman, where we go out and forage for food and bring it back, and the women cook and have babies. It's prehistoric. It's ridiculous. It's totally, totally unfair. This proposition is pretty simple, but it does push the government quicker. We've heard from Minister Mezek that they've been working on this on the previous government. We've not heard anything. So this gives a little push. Every major firm that's represented in Jersey, whether it's a UK firm or a Jersey firm, has an HR department. And we should be consulting with people first, rather than get the wrong end of the stick. We shouldn't preempt the situation. We should talk to people and ask them how they feel about regulating the situation and putting right a situation that has been going on since wages were ever invented. It's just totally wrong, and we should be leading on this. And given the statistics and financial and economic information from Deputy Jean, we should be racing at this because this is good for our economy. We can't afford enough infrastructure, money for health, money for the hospital. And we can generate more income by this at a signature. It's just wrong, and I cannot understand why we're dragging our feet on this. It just asks for consultation and report the findings by January 2026. Fair enough. We have over a year to get this consulted on with as many people as possible. It's great that Social Security have taken the lead on this. That's one organisation. Our arm's length organisation have not caught up. We must make them catch up. And we must make the rest of the economy and the rest of the island catch up with something that just goes back to prehistoric times. It's totally ridiculous, totally unfair, and frankly, absurd. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I found it disappointing that the former Chief Minister, a female member of the Assembly, has thought it appropriate to criticise two other female members of the Assembly now in discussing a matter of great importance to any woman. This is too big an issue for political point scoring. It's too big an issue, and it's a very easy one to grandstand upon, to virtue signal about. This proposition is indicating that government does not care about this area, or that what government is doing is not good enough. So I think it is incumbent on the proposer and anyone who has suggested support for the proposition to explain why they believe government is not working at a reasonable pace in this area, and to accept their contribution if they can. I, like the Constable St Clement, agree it is an economic issue. It is a social issue too. Talking about equal pay for work of equal value is overly simplistic. Does the work of a firewoman equate to that of a care assistant? Does experience affect quality of work? Should you pay somebody who has more experience than another in an area? There's been discussions of that nature around the Council of Ministers table too. How many female bosses are there in every single sector of this island? Do we even know that? There is consultation going in this area. Shouting is an activity. Is it a productive activity? Not if that activity already is happening. As with the Marine Spatial Plan, consultation is a process that often is not highly visible, and with good reason too. So I care about these things. Deputy Alves, Deputy Feltham cares about these things. So does Deputy Miller. So does Deputy Barbara Ward, Deputy Howe and Deputy Labby, all of whom are in the Council of Ministers. So I would urge members to accept and respect government's efforts in this area. I remain uncomfortable that what's been brought has been a proposition that suggests that government isn't doing enough, when in fact it is doing a lot. Thank you.
Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. Probably it will be less than a minute. Follow Deputy Scott's speech. If we all do care, because some members were mentioned in Deputy Scott's speech, it feels like others were not mentioned. It feels like all of us do care. And as Deputy Scott mentioned, it is too big issue, it's a very big issue, which I completely agree. Let's just vote for the proposition and get it done. If it's not for political scoring, and it's not, oh, we are doing, not, you're not telling us what to do, and how, if the government doing or backbenchers doing, if it's important for all of us, let's just do it and support the proposition.
Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. We are an international island, so let's remind ourselves how we're doing compared to other places. In France, significant efforts are being made to close the gender pay gap. One of the key initiatives is the Equal Pay Index, the Index d'égalité professionnelle femmes-hommes, which requires companies of more than 50 employees to annually report on their annual pay gap. That's a requirement, a mandatory requirement. If a company scores less than an index of basically out of 100, if they fall below 75, the company is required to take corrective measures, including persistent non-compliance can result in fines of up to 1% of their payroll. Companies must address specific areas like fair pay after maternity leave and promoting women into top earning positions. Are we doing that? We haven't got the data. Also, it must be said that France, along with with their EU obligations, are also driving the EU Pay Transparency Directive, which is requiring stricter enforcement rules by 2026 for companies with more than 100 employees. Of course, that's scalable down to Jersey. I must say also to call to celebrate the situation in Iceland. They are regarded, I'm told, as a leader in gender pay equality. They consistently rank among the top global gender pay gap countries due to its progressive policies. Again, they have data on which to report. Luxembourg also, as a matter of interest, stands out as a country, as the only country in Europe where women on average earn slightly more than men. That's not been an issue that's been raised. What a great situation if we could say that about Jersey. Across the northern part of the world, no longer an EU member, the new incumbent Labour government has made gender pay equity a priority and aims to accelerate progress in closing the gender pay gap. The party has pledged to strengthen existing reporting requirements by mandating employers that not only report their gender pay gap, but also develop implementation action plans to address it. These will require companies that include their outsourced companies, an issue which is very relevant to us here in Jersey, and gig economy workers to be included in reports. The government has made it absolutely clear in the United Kingdom that they will introduce mandatory pay gap reporting to include those other issues, not only women, but also the other issues that members have raised, such as ethnicity and disability. There are always concerns about pay gap, and unfortunately, there is a need for both a carrot and a stick approach in dealing with it. I don't think that there is a single member of this Assembly that would doubt that there is an issue of gender pay in both our public sector and indeed the private sector. One can only look across businesses in Jersey to see the absence of women in many positions. There are some great examples. It's great to see that the JEC with a male CEO advancing that. That's really, really good. I'm glad to hear that. But if we look at our near utility companies and other state-owned bodies, we're certainly patchy. I think that Jersey Finance having a chief executive and a deputy chief executive, male and female, is good, but we've got a lot to do. And tone matters from the top. We spoke in the previous debate about leadership. Well, I've never really commented about a lot of the goings-on in the last Council of Ministers, but I was certainly, I remain of the view that there is an issue of needing to have absolute respect
for both men and women and of different people of different mindsets. And members may know what I am hinting at in relation to that. It is vital that there is a view that we do not discriminate against anybody, whether they be male, female, old, young, or whether they be diverse in other ways. So this proposition brought by Deputy Andrews, maybe he could have done better in engaging with some of those members who have spent a lot of time, such as Deputy Jeune and Deputy Dublé. And I know the Chief Minister has spoken regularly about this issue. And under her leadership and her Chief Ministership, certainly this was a priority. I don't recognise the comments of members that have said that the last government didn't take this seriously, because it jolly well did. And I, as External Relations Minister, yearned to have some information that I could take out of this island and show that we were an island of equality and fairness in terms of our pay rates, our abilities to be welcoming women into senior roles. We have a recruitment crisis, lest anybody didn't realise, anybody didn't notice. There is a plentiful supply of underpaid women in the United Kingdom that could be incredibly helpful in terms of our recruitment crises. I hear the Minister for Education speaking under his voice. I don't know whether he's trying to tell me something. I'll sit down if he wants to speak. So there is really no justification. I would suggest to the government to not agree with Deputy Andrews' proposition. Data is required. He is asking for a consultation in order to get data. How could you possibly, in this modern world, where we are striving for equality, where we are celebrating the fact that we should be an equal and respectful society between men and women, can we really hold put our hearts behind and our heads behind the logic, the correctness of voting against this proposition brought by a backbencher? The comments of the Council of Ministers seem increasingly those of if it's brought by a non-member of government, it must be opposed, and we must say nasty things and critical things about those that have come before. I don't recognise this kind of atmosphere in this Assembly. I will work with the current government. I voted with the government yesterday, and I will be impartial as I return to my duties here in terms of being absolutely taking everything on its merits. I will treat every issue on its merits, and I think all other members should be. And this is not an issue of partisan, of executive and non-executive. And I urge members to really think very carefully before they send out a message to say that they don't want work done brought by a backbencher on gender pay gap reporting by our non-public sector organisations. This is clearly something that needs to be done. If the Council of Ministers is doing it, which I think we don't believe that they are with a sufficient amount of effort, then support it. I call on the members of the government to support what they say they are already doing. If they are already doing this, then they should vote in favour. They shouldn't vote against it, because they're doing it. And if they're voting against it, it means it's not something that they're putting as a priority. There is no reason in this world where we have seen an absolute problem with, we have certainly got questions. We have got improvements to make in respect of men and women in all cases. I won't dare suggest to say so, as you announced, sadly, your retirement, that one day we may even see a bailiff or a deputy bailiff of the female kind, and I know that you would welcome that because let us not say that as a symbolic issue, sir, but we'll certainly learn to treat de Greffier and say ma'am more regularly than we otherwise do, because we don't see her very often in the chair. But we need to send a tone from the top, and this proposition is very much about getting data. We cannot report
on what we don't know, and this aims to find it. I urge the government, I implore the government, I plead on the government, please come to your senses, vote in favour of this because it matters. And if you're doing it anyway, it's just going to prove to me, it's just going to prove to the public and those backbenchers who want further reassurance that you're going to do it, you're going to carry on doing it. So I urge all members to vote in favour of this very sensible and necessary proposition to get data. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. It's absolutely marvellous to hear so many members so behind addressing and dealing with gender pay gap and inequality of all sorts. Absolutely splendid. So many members have stood up and said how we should be working at speed and taking action and doing more. And one way to do that is to consult again. I will point out one thing, sir. A lot of those members were in a government for 2 years and have actually produced nothing on this in terms of gender pay gap. But now I was saying that nothing is happening in government. I'll tell you what's happening, sir. Rather than continuously consulting, action is being taken by Deputy Alves. And I will read something in a moment, and I can say to Deputy Moore, it isn't my words actually, it's the words of Deputy Alves, who always writes her own speeches. And I will say this. What we've done as a government is invest our energy rather than simply consulting, producing reports, producing documents that we can look at and put on the shelf and virtual signal to doing something. We've actually taken action by investing our energy and resources and practical actions towards improving inequality and generating, by moving to a living wage, probably the greatest impact on inequality for low-paid women, reducing GP costs, providing more affordable homes, as well as making school meals available in all our state's primary schools. We've committed to policies intended to specifically gender inequality around gender pay gap by extending nursery and childcare provision. And I hope, as it was voted for in the CSP, that move to extending childcare and nursery provision will be supported by this Assembly and not be interfered with into the future, and indeed obstacles put in the way of developing those nursery places, because that would be counterintuitive to those who speak against action not being taken on the gender pay gap. And it's interesting, sir, that what we're talking about is a consultation with no idea of what we're consulting on, just to talk to us about something, with no structure to it. But what's actually being produced is a genuine template so that a consistent reporting mechanism can actually be developed. Action is being taken by Deputy Alves and her colleagues in that area. Action is being taken. That's the key. And so I'm a bit tired of things being brought to say, do something you're already doing, but I will take the credit for you doing something that you're already doing because I've raised something that you're already doing. That is not helping as a government. And we need to move on from where we were. We can all virtue signal, sir. I speak as a member of a party that is equally men and women, and we're all paid exactly the same, sir. There is no gender pay gap in our party. It's marvellous. It's an ideal. It's a model for people. It's a model for this Assembly. It's a model for how we move forward in our politics and our representation. It's a model for France. C'est très bien. Merci.
I'm sorry.
Pardon. Excuse me.
A little bit of humour, but moving through the chair.
So we've had a lot of criticism of a lack of ambition. I'll tell you what the ambition is, sir, is to actually take action rather than continuously produce reports, continue to contemplate our navel, continuously ask for some sort of what is called consultation, which is just a reason to not take action, a reason to say that we're looking at doing something. We're thinking about doing something, and we're going to gather data and then decide eventually on doing something, but we're not sure what it is because we actually have no political direction whatsoever. So what we're actually going to do is take some action, and that's what we've seen in these few months, that we've actually tried to take some action, as opposed to the continuous reporting that we've had. So that's what we're going to look for. And we'll come to that as we come to the government plan, and we'll come to that as projects come through. We'll come to that as we talk about reports on nurseries, which I will be producing soon. and we'll see some of the actions that are actually being taken, some tangible actions that are being set up, as opposed to being perhaps opposed later on. So I urge members this. If you want to vote for this, I suppose you can. And you can get involved with this notion that we backbenchers have to drive government because of perhaps a level of lack of trust in things actually happening. And it would be nice if we could rebuild that trust at some point with some sort of meaningful dialogue, as opposed to the personal nature of some of the comments that have been made about members. So what I would suggest is, if you want to vote for this, you're encouraging, yet again, this notion of bringing forward something that's already happening, using state's time, and I know I've taken 5 minutes of state's time to explain this, but there you go, you might as well, because that's what we seem to want to do. Rather than just letting the deputy get on with this, develop the actual reporting mechanism, have a system in place that can be used and gather meaningful information and actually perhaps make genuine, tangible change. And for those members who have been in the Assembly for so long, who constantly talk about this, I would say, sir, perhaps the time for action was a long, long time ago, rather than sitting in this Assembly, sir, and just saying that action isn't being taken now. Give it a chance. Give the person working on this a chance to actually do something, rather than constantly bringing distractions to the policies and the actions that are being taken. Thank you, sir.
So may I seek your judgment? I believe the previous speech is at risk of misleading the Assembly. It stated that no action was taken. And I've just counted up at least 8 or 9.
Well, I think what you can do, I'm not in a position to make a ruling as to whether there's a misleading or not. I simply do not have the information. If you wish to ask the Speaker for a point of clarification, then you're in a position to do that if the Speaker gives way and permits that point of clarification. That's a matter for you, Deputy.
Is there not a standing order that permits members to ask your judgment when a member is at risk of misleading the Assembly, sir?
No, that would be a point of order, but as I've, I think, indicated in writing on other occasions, it's almost impossible for the Chair to know when there's something happening, because we then get into an exchange where you say, well, this happened, and then the Minister would come back and say, well, that happened, and we'll end up with 2 or 3 further speeches. There must be a method of correcting it, but we can't really do it in that particular way, in my judgment. If you wish to ask a point of clarification from the last speaker, if the last speaker will give way for a point of clarification, then it's open to you to do so.
Would the Speaker give way for a point of clarification?
No, sir.
Well, that is within the terms of standing orders, and I think if it is the case that a member thinks that there has been an egregious misleading of the Assembly within the terms of then that is something that has to be dealt with, I think, out with the Assembly or on a motion of some sort. But it's not a matter on which, unless it is obviously the case, that the presiding officer can make a ruling if it's not accepted.
Sir, I'm happy to. Sorry, I've had a difficult few days. I am happy to give way for clarification. Of course, I don't want this to be like this, so please do. And I will clarify, because I have a great deal of respect for the Deputy, and it's been a challenging few days.
So what would you like to...
Thank you, sir. And I'm grateful to the Speaker, because I think it is important that the tone of speeches in this Assembly is respectful, and that actually we have a collaborative approach. And as such, could the Speaker clarify whether he has an understanding of all of the recommendations from both of the previous scrutiny reports and the actions that the previous government undertook? Because I have just briefly reviewed them, and there are a minimum of 8 that the previous government completed, and I think up to around 13 to 14 that were underway. So has the Minister reviewed those? Perhaps he has not, and I would understand that, which might explain the potentially misleading statement he made.
Yes, sorry, sir. Yes, I absolutely don't want to mislead the Assembly. When one makes a speech and we make general comments, you're right, I shouldn't make general comments. And I absolutely agree, it would be nice if the tone of speeches were better in this assembly, particularly over the last 2 days, with somebody who sat here and had to deal with that personally. It really would be quite nice. So what I mean is, I think more action, much more action can be taken. And my drive at the moment is to actually act on reports, to me, so a recommendation is not an action, it's a recommendation. You've got to do something with it. And many of those weren't. And that's what I'm trying to get to. That I think, sir, that a number of people in this assembly have stood up and criticised a particular member of this assembly for not taking action at the same time as not seeing that actions are being taken. So perhaps we're in a similar position here. So if I'm quite happy to apologise to the member, sir, because I know things went on. But what I would say is you've got to give this government a chance too to recognise it in a similar way the things that are happening, sir. Perhaps this is a good interaction, sir, and a good point of clarification, because I can say we've got to move on from where we were. We've got to move on from the perhaps unhappiness that has happened in this assembly and give this next government a chance with what is best for Jersey and what is best for all of us.
I think that is definitely moving into a
Sorry,
second
sir. Yes,
speech.
thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Any other member wish to speak on this proposition? No other member wishes to speak? Then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Andrews to respond.
Thank you very much, sir. I must thank all members who have contributed to this debate. For me, as a feminist, I think it's absolutely crucial that this proposition is supported. We need to be very open about the differing views that firms will have. We have to embrace those that are in support of gender pay and income ratio reporting, and we also have to understand the views that potentially are antithetical about gender pay and income ratio reporting, and potentially the complexities that some of the firms face if they had to report such information. And so that would give the government a good understanding of the assistance that they could provide to such firms in those instances. Now, I have to say, Deputy Jeanne, I commend her. I think it was a fantastic speech, and much of what she said in the PwC report, and it's a report that I read some time ago, but again, it's a report that is certainly worth reading because there are many benefits to seeing more women partaking in the labour force. And Jersey, compared to other jurisdictions, we tend to have a high labour force participation rate among women, but again, I think that potentially could be increased, and that would be down to implementation of policies. But those policies could only probably come to fruition if we are reporting such information that this proposition is looking to engage with non-public sector firms with. I think it's absolutely pivotal that we have an understanding of the extent of the gender pay gap, and we need to look at the measures that we can implement to try and reduce the gender pay gap that exists. Now, I understand from a number of speakers who are executive members that they postulated the view that we are already doing this. Well, there's a difference between consulting and consultation. I may consult Deputy Farnham about a particular political matter, but it's not a consultation broadly, because again, 47 members are not part of that consultation process. And this is the reason why we need to see a more expansive approach where non-public sector entities are engaged. It's not about particular groups who the government are trying to work with, such as, for instance, the Diversity Network, who again articulated the view that the government must be doing more because they don't feel that the government has really engaged them enough. And even when I discussed my proposition with the Minister, there were competing priorities, and this was at the bottom of the list, or shall we say it was a lower priority. There were other things that the Minister was trying to bring forward above what I am trying to do here with this proposition. But I still think if we are not to support this proposition today, then there is a real risk that the gender pay gap, income ratio reporting, again, could demonstrate that there are disparities that are becoming larger, and the Council of Ministers have not taken positive steps to try and address it because they are not consulting widely with non-public sector firms. All they are doing is discussing with who they choose to discuss this with, because they are antithetical about the potential of legislation, and they are denying people the opportunity to have their say, and it's their right as citizens to postulate their view. If they believe that Mandatory reporting should be in place, and potentially they might even hold the opinion that we do need legislation, but we are not going to hear those voices because those voices are going to be suppressed because no consultation is going to be approved, and that is the real risk that we run here. This assembly is not autocratic. We should be embracing the pluralism of views among the public, and unfortunately that is not going to take place. Why? Because the Council of Ministers, they don't want to hear the voices who are very much pro the feminist movement, who are very much pro equality, who want to address the gender pay gap, who want to address income inequality in this island. And that's not going to happen because the Council of Ministers are saying, no, we're not going to do it. But in saying that they are already doing this work already, I'm afraid that is not the truth, because even with the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel, how many times have we asked questions of the Minister, the Chief Minister, and the Assistant Chief Ministers? And we've got nowhere with gender pay reporting. Neither have we got anywhere with income ratio reporting, because the government hasn't taken steps. It's not been active, it's not been conspicuous, it's not been bold. And this is an area that is absolutely critical, because there are so many benefits, as Deputy Jeanne highlighted in her speech, about reducing that gender pay gap, increasing incomes, increasing output within the economy, increasing GDP. Why are we not pro this proposition? I do not understand. And because this debate, unfortunately, has been based about data, and some individuals don't understand the importance of data, because without data, all we have is an opinion, and it's the Council of Ministers' opinion. If we're politicians, surely we have to be better informed. And it's data that is reported to us that is going to better inform and enhance the development of good, robust policies. But that's not going to happen if members go, oh no, we're just going to say no, we don't care. I mean, surely, if you're a feminist, you'd be supporting this proposition. It's supporting rights. It's closing the gap. Why would we not address this? Why are we just leaving the inequalities remain as they are and potentially getting worse, when we are the deciding body in this island in terms of addressing the issues that exist? And many states, as I mentioned in the OECD, they do see this to be a problem, and they've taken positive steps to address it. Whereas we, as a States Assembly, what are we doing? I mean, the executive aren't really doing much, hence why I had to bring forward my proposition. And all of a sudden, the case is, oh, no, sorry, we are going to try and do some things, but you're not going far enough, and hence the need for this proposition to hold the executive to account. All I'm doing is my job as a non-executive member. You know, I want to see women progress. And then we've got to think about the benefits of this consultation in the longer term. Because there are many things that could come out from this consultation that will support and enable the executive, who potentially are going to miss out on opportunities to engage with crucial stakeholders who they are probably not going to engage with at this point in time, because they are just engaging with a select few individuals, and that's not really going far enough. We've got an island with, 104,000 people here? And we're just going to speak, say, to the diversity network and informal chat, etc., and that's as far as it goes? I mean, we need to be doing much more. Much more. You know, we cannot see politicians not doing anything. And unfortunately, that's the case here, because even if we compare, say, the government plan and absence of data, we're not informed as non-executive members. And again here, the executive has the opportunity to obtain more information, obtain more data, and they don't want to do it. And instead, what we're given is a response where, oh, well, we're already doing this, we're already, implementing school meals, etc. That's absolutely relevant to this debate. I don't want to speak about school meals. I don't want to speak about the implementation of other social policies. This is about gender pay, and it's about income ratio reporting. Now, if you're not doing anything in the area, and you then have to try and justify your position to say, well, look, we're doing something, well, I'm afraid that's not good enough, because that's not relevant to the debate. We're here, okay, to discuss the particulars of this proposition. Now, I know there's been some people who said, well, there's going to be no structure to the consultation. Well, of course there is. That's the executive's job. This is an in-principle proposition. You go away, you do the work, you form the questions. It's all about qualitative engagement. asking people questions, receiving the responses, interpreting the information, collating all the information you have, and then doing it that way, at least it will better inform the executive. Now, for me, as a progressive, ideally, yes, I would like to see gender pay and income ratio reporting become mandatory. But if the consultation comes back with a response that is overwhelmingly firms don't want to do it, then fair enough, I will respect that decision. And I think the executive have to respect the views of those who are maybe antithetical to the views that they hold, and hence the reason why we should be supporting this proposition. Give people a voice. Don't suppress them. I mean, that's autocracy. You know, we're a liberal democracy. Surely people should hold a view, and surely we should respect those views of those who are antithetical towards us. But by not engaging, I'm sorry, but that's really not good enough. That is not a democratic process. And I think it's really sending out a poor signal to members of the public. You know, we cannot just be thinking about ourselves all the time and thinking that our opinion is best when we are not willing to engage. Because our opinion potentially could be disproved, because other people may come up with the evidence to reinforce their argument, and then we have to be accepting that actually their point is probably better than our own. But by not engaging, we don't know that, do we? And that's the particular issue that I have real concern with here. So what I would say to members is this: do the right thing. Allow non-public sector firms to have a voice. Let them engage. They need to articulate their views to the executive. And from then on, we need to respect the results. And again, there are two camps I understand. One who is definitely for pro-reporting and the other who is less so. I get that in terms of a mandatory aspect or not. But we need to ensure that this consultation does take place. And so, sir, I think I have really made the point very clear, the importance of this proposition. I have to commend members for contributing to the debate, even though I maybe didn't agree with some of the speeches that were made. But I hope we can now go to the vote, and I call for the appel, sir.
Vote is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. I'll ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been defeated. 11 votes pour, 30 votes contre, 1 abstention.
Can we have the votes for and against, please? Pour or contre?
Those members voting pour, the Connotab of St Clement and Deputies Doublé, Gardner, Moore, Osoph, War, Miles, Reniff, Jearn, Wilson and Andrews. And those members voting contre, the Connotab of St Helier, St Brelard, Trinity, St Peter, St John, Brouville, St Mary, St Saviour and St One. And Deputies Southern, Labby, Tadier, Luce, Morel, Ayer, Bob Ward, Alves, Farnham, Mesick, Balash, Coles, Scott, Catherine Curtis, Beltham, Miller, Howe, Berry, Alex Curtis, Barbara Ward and Rose Binet, and Deputy Kovac abstained.
Very well. The next matter that was on the order paper has fallen away, as I understand it, P.68, the Havre de Pas matter. So we then come on to the funding for culture, arts and heritage, P.69, lodged by Deputy Tadier. The main respond with the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, and I ask the greffier to read that proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion, A, that no changes should be made to the target revenue expenditure model agreed by the States in P40 of 2019 for the funding of culture, arts and heritage, unless a proposition exclusively concerning the funding of those specific matters is considered and approved by the Assembly. And B, to request the Chief Minister to remove any references to changes to this funding model in the draft budget, Government Plan 2025 to 2028, and to incorporate any financial changes necessary to re-implement the funding of 1% of overall state's revenue expenditure for arts, heritage and culture.
Deputy.
Thank you, sir. It's been so far, I think, quite a long week. I think we're starting to feel it. It's also been a week that has perhaps been fraught, maybe more so than some of the usual debates. And I think that actually we've had some very tough, controversial, but also interesting debates and necessary debates in the last couple of days, which I think we have actually handled ourselves well in ultimately, because we've shown that we disagree with ourselves sometimes, even internally, and that's fine, and that does happen from time to time. And I'm hoping that with this last item on the agenda, and I'm grateful that members have agreed to allow me to take this slightly early, because I think it is timely and it does need to be debated today for reasons that were understood earlier in the week, that we can at least find lots of common ground. And I look over to my colleague, the Minister for Economic Development, I call it as it was, Economic Development, Tourism, Sport and Culture, but also now a sustainable economics or sustainable economy. And I think it's all of those things, hopefully. And I know that whatever the outcome of this debate, that I'm not here to question the Minister's commitment to arts and culture in the island, because I know that he has that very much at his heart, and that on that subject we're very much singing from the same hymn sheet. It doesn't mean that I won't be making critical comments of the direction of travel, because I think there is definitely something to play for in this debate, both in terms of procedure, sir, but also in terms of the material outcomes that we're seeking for all islanders in this domain. I'm also mindful that because it's the last debate of the week, before we maybe take probably not even a much needed break, because I know that we've got other work to do, certainly I do tomorrow, is that it's important to keep things fresh as far as possible. So I always try and find a small angle that perhaps takes us slightly away and brings us back to what we're here to consider, perhaps with slightly fresh eyes. So talking about fresh eyes, I can't help but forget that earlier in the week, when Deputy Gorst was sitting next to me, he says that sometimes he likes speaking after me because we see things through slightly different lenses. And I took my glasses off because actually there's a strange irony that Deputy Gorst and I have very similar looking frames to our glasses, but it's entirely possible, I'm sure very likely, that we both have physically different lenses in our glasses, and possibly slightly different philosophical lenses in the way that we look at the world. And that's what I want us to look at today, is about actually how arts and culture, I'm just going to call it arts and culture for ease, but it does of course include heritage. I think heritage is part of that wider culture, which is both tangible and intangible, so I don't want them to think I'm forgetting them in all of this. So the way we look at arts and culture in our island, I think, is really important, and I'll come back to that. The second sartorial reference that I will make is that I noticed that there was a journalist who joined us in the Assembly on Tuesday who shares the same surname as our Minister, and he works for, I think, Bailiwick and the JP, I don't know if he's there today. And slightly whimsically, he was commenting on the attire of members, and he said that there was quite a lot of blue ties in the Assembly on Tuesday, and that he picked out, I think, 2 or 3 of the lady members, shall we say, if we're still allowed to use those terms, and said that they were dressed very smartly and Maggie would have been pleased. So I think he was referring to Maggie Thatcher. And indeed, outside, sir, when I was talking to the Chief Minister with his blue tie, blue suit, and myself with my blue tie on at the time, he said, "Oh, you look very conservative today, Deputy." And we had some banter that I don't need to go into, because that will remain in the corridor. But so I made sure yesterday and today that when I came in expecting to deliver this speech, I thought I'd choose something of a neutral tie. It's not red, it's not blue, but it is very much gold. And I've chosen that for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that what we're talking about today is not just the bottom line of an accountant's sheet. And this goes back to the lens reference. The way we look at the world can be in 2 ways. It can be about just the bottom line of the an accountant sheet, or in our case, the bottom line of a government budget. There are savings that need to be made. We need to be realistic. These are kind of arguments that we will be hearing later on today. Or we can think about the value of things, not just the cost of things. And I would say that by wearing a gold tie made with golden threads, I want to talk about the way that culture and arts are actually the golden thread that run through everything that we do as a community, sir. The culture and arts bring a cohesiveness, I think, that bind us all together as an island community. It's also part of that island identity work that we are working so closely on, which sometimes feels really elusive. But it's also a thread that binds us with the rest of the world, because as the Minister reminded us earlier this week, we are not an isolated island, even though it can feel like that. We are an outward-looking island, and this is where the value of the arts and culture really come into their own. It is both about the local, but it's also about the global. It's about the personal experience. It's often about the esoteric sometimes, but it's also about the universal. And that is the way that we can reflect and put ourselves in positions that otherwise we wouldn't necessarily be able to reflect on. And the second point I would make on this is that it's the reason that funding for culture is so vital to us, and that we should reduce that funding or even reduce the mechanism by which we fund it or change it. We should do that at our peril, and we should only do that after due consideration and due consultation, because there are so many islanders whose only engagement with what you might call, well, I'm not even going to call it high art, different types of art, different types of music, the only opportunity and the only exposure they will have to it is by the funding that we provide for the arm's length organisations and for others who provide those opportunities. And what I mean by that is some of the outreach work that goes on. Some people in the island, they don't have to think twice about jumping on a plane, going over to London, where all of the museums, public museums, are free. And I would recommend that any parent and child, if they have the opportunity to go to Trafalgar Square, go to the Tate Modern or the Old Tate, go to the various different museums, the Victoria and Albert, and have a look at those. But it's not within the gift of everybody to be able to do this. So we also heard earlier in the week about digging deep on these controversial issues for some that are difficult, and actually finding out what our values are. And I think those values are about having universality, equality, to make sure that everybody has access to arts and culture that our island has to offer, and also the fact that they can be enriched by it. So, sir, I don't want to entirely make the case for the arts, because I think that has already been done. I hope that each of the 49 of us, or fewer today, who are in the Assembly, will be convinced of the value of arts. But I make those because it's important to talk about the wider subject matter that we are here to debate, sir. But let's look at immediately what is in front of us. And I will refer to my report, sir, because I've written it in a deliberately concise way so that it could be followed quite easily. And initially, I do also want to talk to perhaps the members who were here in the last Assembly, and I'm not going to forget the new members, of course, sir, because this started in 2019 when there was a recommendation in a report by my predecessor when I was briefly at Culture to look at the state of the sector in Jersey. There was a general consensus and a recognition, even from politicians, that funding for that sector had fallen behind. And a report was commissioned, but unfortunately not published. And when I took office in 2019, I said, this report is really great, there's some good stuff in it, it needs to be published. And so I pushed my minister, who was Deputy or Senator Farnham at the time, to publish this, and he did agree. And one of those findings and recommendations was that Jersey had fallen behind in its funding of culture, where the European average for the EU 27 was 1% of their overall budget. That's a benchmark that's used. And that's why the 1% we're going to be talking about today isn't just plucked out of the air. It's a standard benchmark which is used to assess where we stood versus the EU. We've heard a lot about the EU this week, and we know that they do some things very well. And I would say that actually putting value on their culture and their arts is something that we have learnt from, and that we're also doing in Jersey. So back in 2019, there was a list of members who supported this who are still in the Assembly, and I think it's worth refreshing our memories as to who they might be. So we had, in alphabetical order, it was Deputy Ayer, Deputy Alves, the Constable of St Helier, we had Deputy Gardner, the Constable of St Brelard, we have Deputy Caroline Labby behind me, we have Constable of Trinity, we have Deputy Lehegarat, Deputy Mezek, no surprise, Deputy Christina Moore, or Senator at the time. Deputy Morell was pleased to support that. And I've heard him make many speeches at art events about how important the 1% for arts is as a formula. We'll talk, maybe he can talk about that later. We have Constable Shenton-Stone, or Constable of St Martin's as she's known, Deputy Southern, Constable of St Peter, Deputy Ward, and of course myself. Now, we were all here when that decision was made, but there was another decision that was made only a year later, when the government was trying to cut the funding in 2023, because the original proposition was time limited, only took it up to 2022. And so that proposition was to keep it past 2024 and into the future. So effectively, and in reality, a previous States Assembly ratified that decision and said we support the 1%, and it shouldn't just be for now and for this term of the budget, it should continue into the future. And I'm pleased to say that apart from one constable who is no longer in the Assembly, all of those who voted on that day, I think there were 44, voted to support that principle. So that is the starting point. We have a very strong message of support from some of the existing members of this Assembly, in fact, and many of those other deputies and constables who have now left, and senators who have now left. And I have to say also some of those late members. So there were members there who are sadly no longer with us, but who, when they did vote, they said, we want this to continue into the future. So that's fine. The second thing is that I recognise that there is a valid political debate to be had around this point. But it's not for me or any other backbencher to initiate that debate. It is for those who want to change the status quo to initiate a debate. And the usual process for that, which is outlined in standing orders, sir, would be that if a rescindment motion wants to be made, you have a proposer and 3 other seconders, and you bring a report explaining the arguments for the rescindment. That hasn't happened. What do we have from this government? First of all, there's been no consultation with the industry. It's simply been sprung on everybody in the form of a line of text, that is to say, in the current government report, saying that now that we've reached the 1%, it will stay like that and we'll give it an RPI figure. Which in itself isn't very clear, because I had to read that a few times. I had to message the Gref and say, what do they mean it will stay like that? Do they mean the 1% will stay in place and it will be RPI? Or will it be the figure? And I think it became clear that they were saying, let's freeze it at 2024 levels. We've got a big hike in government expenditure coming, and we certainly don't want to give the arts any of that extra growth that we don't need to. So let's bring in RPI at a time, let's bring in the RPI model, without having gone to the Assembly to do that first, without having discussed it with the sector whom it will affect the most, and just put it as a line in that budget report, at a time, of course, when RPI is relatively low. If this had been done at a time when RPI was at 5, 7, 10%, I would say, okay, maybe they're trying to protect the budget of the arts sector. But if they'd have done it and said, actually, 2025, you can have your 1%, we'll get some consensus, and then we'll bring it, and then we'll talk about whether RPI is best, whether 1% is best, whether something in between is best. It could be the difference between 1% and RPI, or it could be a completely different figure. It could be based on GVA. Then I would be less concerned about it. But I do also have material concerns, and I think it is important to try and make the case as to why the 1% is useful, and I think why the previous Assembly supported it unanimously, and why even the current Minister has up until now sung overtures to its beauty, if you like, if I can be slightly flowery in my golden threads. And I think the beauty of the 1% is that it's fixed. Everybody knows what they're going to get. The government decides what it's going to spend for a particular year, and it does that spending, of course, based on taxation. It has to raise that revenue, and I always like to think of this as a social contract that has been made between the government, the Assembly, and the citizen. But it's also a contract, of course, that's been made between the Assembly and the arts community. And we're saying that whatever we spend, we recognise that 1% of that needs to be spent on arts and culture. And when that money is spent, sir, and I perhaps at this point could ask for a sheet to be distributed at some point so that members have, if members got it, great. Right. We're all on the same hymn sheet, so to speak. That money which is distributed to the arts sector, it's around about £10 million, give or take, and it might be slightly more in coming years. That's what they rely on, as I've said, to provide services to all of our islands so that it can be accessible for everybody. And I've got the sheet here as well. And what I said in a recent interview with the paper, sir, is that when we spend money on the arts and on culture, we don't just spend it on that. We spend it on health. We spend it in education. We spend it on well-being. We spend it on tourism, because it's providing things for everybody in our island to do with their tourists. Whether it's for locals to go and see a classical concert at the Arts Centre, or to see a pantomime that is put on at Christmas time, perhaps Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, or whether it's something different at the beautiful Opera House that will be opening next year, which I hope that many people can go to and enjoy. These are things that they wouldn't enjoy without that money, and many of these events are free, and they actually have a cross-subsidy into departments like the hospital, like our care homes, where arts and healthcare was able to be restored because of this vital funding, and our schools. And I spoke to the Arts Centre very recently, who've sent me some of the figures through. I won't go through all of them, but because of that money and the guaranteed growth that they've had, they're able to go into schools, and it's gratis. So these are lessons which are effectively provided and paid for by economic development for the Education Minister, so that he doesn't have to find that money out of his budget. And so the idea is that when, in fact, ministers might be being told, well, you know, if we give arts and culture an extra £300,000, £400,000 or £500,000 this year, we might have to take some money out of your budget. But let's look at the reality. Because if we turn to the back page on those figures that I've circulated, we notice that not all of the money is simply spent on the 4 arm's-length organisations. It also goes to fund festivals, which are great for the island. Some of the money goes to the Creative Island Partnership and Creative Spaces Cultural Diplomacy. So all those other things that are going on that ministers are doing with Europe, for example. But the last part is the culture and arts spend which is outside of the economy department, so to speak, which nevertheless goes to fund culture. And we have £500,000 going to fund Gérier and Gérier teachers. That's money that would otherwise be coming out of the Education Minister's budget, because normally teachers are paid for by education. If you're an art teacher, if you're a music teacher, perhaps with the exception, I'm not sure about how the music service is funded, there's a peripatetic element there, which probably does get funding from economic development, you would be paid for out of the education budget. So all that great work that Gérier teachers, for example, are doing in our schools is being paid for by culture. It's the same, sir, with the Liberation Day celebration. Some of it, I'm sure, not necessarily all of it. And those great events that we host for the whole of the island on what is effectively our National Day, is provided by the cultural budget, sir. And when push comes to shove, if the budget is reduced, if spending is reduced, and the minister will say, well, there's still growth, it's just much less growth, these departments, these sectors will do less. And I'm not going to go on, sir, because we're coming up to lunchtime, and I'm trying to actually capture the spirit of this argument rather than just the facts and figures. Is we also have to remember that many people who choose to work in this sector, it could be for Jersey Heritage, could be for the Art Centre, could be for Art House Jersey, Jersey Opera House, or many of those other organisations, they often do it because it's a vocation. They're jobs which often require, certainly at Jersey Heritage, but others, to manage an art centre or an opera house over here, you have to have a very specific skill set, but the pay is not commensurate, I would say. They're often paid a lot less than they would be if they were working in other sectors in Jersey where they might not have to have quite the same skill set. And so they're doing it, they're often taking a cut in what they could be earning, and they're putting long hours in, and we know long hours, exist in many sectors. And they do it out of the passion, sir. And it's really this guaranteed funding model which I think is securing the future of our island. So I would put it to members on two counts. It may well be that there are some members of the Assembly who have slight concerns. They look at a particular organisation and saying, I don't really know if I understand that. I think they've got a few too many administrators. I think they could do this. I think they could do that. There'll be others who say, actually, I really appreciate what that organisation does, and I know if they had more, they could do more. That's not what this debate is about. It needs to come back to the point of focus, which is the principle. If government is to bring in sweeping new changes to a formula, then they must first of all do it with due consultation. That consultation hasn't taken place, and they should really be doing it through a standalone proposition to seek the consensus of the Assembly and all involved, not just impose it. We wouldn't do that for the fishers that we heard yesterday. We heard talk of an extensive consultation programme. We wouldn't do it without knowing what the long-term consequences were and the potential cuts to services that needed to be made in that sector. And I think we wouldn't do it without the due consultation of this Assembly, sir. So I ask for the same respect to be shown. And I do ask for members to actually put aside whatever political affiliations or pressure that might be borne upon them again in this vote, and actually bring it back to the fact that at the end of the day and at the end of this week, we are all first and foremost parliamentarian states members, and that we must protect due process as well as actually looking out for the industry, the arts and culture sector that we're here, I think, to do the best for at all times. Thank you, sir. I do. In making the proposition, sir, I only move Part A, not Part B.
Well, you're moving only Part A, and Part B therefore falls away. Is the proposition Part A seconded?
Yes, sir.
Very well. We've reached 12:40. I know Deputy Gardner has on notice that she wishes to speak. I haven't heard anyone else. Perhaps a member could indicate if they are likely to want to speak on the matter by putting their lights on. Well, there we are. Then is the adjournment proposed? Very well. The Assembly stands adjourned until 2:15.